I stood in my own living room, suitcase still in hand, as my son and his wife rearranged the furniture I built. The photo of my late wife lay face down on the floor, forgotten in their rush to move in. "Dad," my son stammered, "we just thought it'd be easier this way." Easier? That's what betrayal sounds like when it wears a polite smile. My daughter-in-law turned to me, her voice calm, cutting. "You don't even have a family anymore, Franklin. You have space." And in that moment, surrounded by their greed and my silence, I made a quiet promise. They'd learn exactly whose home this really was. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. The morning broke slow over the Colorado mountains, the kind of quiet that felt almost heavy. Franklin Cole stirred awake before the sun fully climbed the ridge. 69 years old, retired firefighter, husband no longer, father in name only. The air inside the house held that sharp mountain chill that seeps into bones before coffee can fight it off. He sat up in bed and listened. No pipes running, no footsteps overhead, no soft hum of conversation. Just silence. The kind that reminded him he wasn't waiting for anyone anymore. In the kitchen, the old percolator gurgled weakly. Franklin poured coffee into a chipped mug, same one he used every morning since Maggie's passing 3 years ago. He set it next to the framed photograph on the counter, Maggie, smiling in a summer dress, holding his hand in front of the lake. The photo had started to fade at the edges, but her eyes hadn't lost their warmth. He traced a finger across the glass, whispering, "Morning, Mags." Steam curled from the mug, twisting into the pale light that filtered through the window. Outside, the mountains stood eternal, solid, unmoving, while everything else in his life had shifted beneath him. The driveway was empty, the road beyond it untouched by tire marks. He hadn't seen Ryan in almost 7 months, Diane even longer. There was a time when weekends meant laughter and grandkids tracking mud across the porch. Now, the only sounds were the groans of settling timber and the occasional bird calling from the pine ridge. He took his coffee to the porch and sat in the rocking chair, its creak echoing through the valley. The air smelled of pine and memory. Franklin picked up his phone, thumb hovering over the same name that had stayed unanswered too many times. He pressed it anyway. The dial tone filled the quiet, cutting through it like a cold knife. 1 ring, 2, 3. Then the voice he dreaded, automated, detached. "Hey, this is Ryan, leave a message." Franklin let the silence stretch before ending the call. He didn't bother leaving a voicemail. Words had started to feel useless lately, like they only made the distance more real. He leaned back, staring at the tree line, trying to remember the last real conversation he'd had with his son. It had been over something small, property taxes maybe, but it had ended with the familiar half-hearted promise, "We'll come visit soon, Dad." Soon had turned into seasons. Around noon, a knock startled him from his thoughts. When he opened the door, his neighbors, Tom and Betty from down the hill, stood smiling, holding a pie wrapped in foil. "We made too much again," Betty said kindly. "You know us, still cooking for a family that's long gone." Franklin chuckled softly, accepting it with both hands. "You're keeping me spoiled." Betty's eyes darted over his shoulder into the quiet house. "Your family must be busy these days. Haven't seen Ryan's truck around for a while." The words landed gently but dug deep. He held the pie close to his chest, smiled a little too tightly. "Busy forgetting," he said, voice low but steady. Betty hesitated, searching his face for humor, found none, and patted his arm before they left down the gravel path. Inside again, Franklin set the pie on the counter and stared at it for a long time. The silence crept back in, louder now. He walked through the house, room by room, each filled with echoes instead of voices. The living room still smelled faintly of Maggie's old candles. The guest bedroom had neatly folded sheets, untouched since Ryan's last visit, when Diane complained about the altitude, the dust, and the lack of Wi-Fi. He paused at the hallway where their wedding photo hung. Young Maggie in her firefighter's jacket, him beside her, both of them beaming. That was 40 years ago, before the kids grew up and the house turned into a mausoleum for memories. Franklin exhaled slowly, a man used to both fire and loneliness. But even for him, this kind of silence was beginning to feel unnatural, like something waiting to be filled. He reached for the phone again, thumb resting on Ryan's contact. For a moment, he almost pressed it. Almost. Then, with a tired sigh, he set it down. Outside, the wind began to stir across the ridge, bending the trees with a low, restless hum. Franklin stood by the window, mug in hand, watching the light fade. Somewhere deep in his chest, a quiet unease flickered, an instinct born from years of reading danger before it showed its face. He didn't know it yet, but this was the last peaceful morning the house would ever see. The phone rang mid-morning, sharp and sudden, slicing through the kind of quiet Franklin had grown too used to. He nearly dropped his coffee as he reached for it. The name on the screen, Ryan Cole, glowed like a word from another life. He hesitated a second before answering. "Dad," Ryan's voice came through, too bright, too casual. "We were just talking, and Diane thought, maybe it's time we visit soon." For a moment, Franklin couldn't speak. The warmth of that single word, visit, so foreign now, almost a stranger's kindness. "Well, I'd like that," he managed. "It's been too long." Through the line came the faint rustle of movement, then a muffled female voice, Diane. Her tone was lower, sharp around the edges. "Ask about the property taxes," she whispered, not realizing the old man's hearing was sharper than she thought. Ryan cleared his throat awkwardly. "Yeah, also, how are you holding up with the taxes and all? That place must be a lot for one person." Franklin paused. The warmth faltered for just a moment. Then he smoothed it over with practiced calm. "The house is fine, son. Just needs a little care, that's all." Ryan laughed softly, forced. "Yeah, well, we'll come up this weekend. Diane's been wanting to see the mountains again." "Good," Franklin said, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "The rooms are still ready. I'll make sure everything's set." When the call ended, the house felt lighter for a brief, dangerous moment. Franklin found himself standing in the middle of the living room, phone still in hand, the echo of his son's voice fading into the walls. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed the sound of it. He spent the rest of the morning moving from room to room, straightening picture frames, dusting mantles that hadn't seen fingerprints in months. He opened the guest room, Ryan's old room once, and pulled the curtains back. Dust motes spun lazily in the sunlight. The bed still had that old blue quilt Maggie had sewn years ago. He shook it out carefully, his hands remembering her touch. "They'll like this," he murmured to no one. By afternoon, he was in the attic, sorting through boxes marked in Maggie's handwriting. He wanted the house to feel alive again, even if only for a weekend. Old Christmas decorations, yellowed newspapers, and letters. So many letters. He opened one at random, addressed simply, "Franklin," for later. Her handwriting slanted softly, full of calm certainty. "If anything ever threatens what we built, don't let them take it. Not the home, not the memories. Keep what's ours. And remember, love doesn't mean surrender." He read the line twice, the words cutting deeper each time. He folded the letter carefully, pressing it to his chest, before placing it back in the envelope. Evening crept through the windows, painting long shadows across the floors. Franklin stood in the middle of his spotless living room, feeling something unsettled stir in the pit of his stomach. The kind of unease that doesn't have a name yet, but knows it's coming. He sat down in his old armchair and stared at the phone again, Ryan's name still on the recent calls list. Diane's voice replayed in his mind, sharp, purposeful. "Ask about the property taxes." He took a deep breath, exhaled slowly. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it was just small talk. Maybe he was too suspicious for his own good. But as the fire crackled in the hearth, the glow catching the edge of Maggie's photo on the mantel, a line formed quietly in his thoughts, uninvited, heavy with foreshadow. He whispered it out loud, as if testing how it sounded in the room. "You don't even have a family." The words lingered, cold and distant, echoing through the empty house long after he stopped speaking. Outside, the wind began to rise again, brushing against the window panes like a warning he couldn't quite hear. By Saturday afternoon, the mountain air carried the smell of pine and rain. Franklin stood at the edge of his driveway, watching a silver SUV crawl up the gravel path, dust swirling behind it. His pulse tightened, an unfamiliar mix of anticipation and restraint. The car door opened, and Ryan stepped out first. Same broad shoulders, same nervous smile. But there was something guarded in his eyes. Diane followed, perfectly dressed as always, her sunglasses large enough to hide any emotion she didn't want seen. "Dad!" Ryan called, voice too loud, too cheerful. Franklin met him halfway. The hug was brief, polite, warm in form, cold in truth. Diane leaned in for an air kiss that never quite landed. "It's been so long," she said, scanning the house behind him. "Still looks exactly the same." "Why fix what works?" Franklin replied with a small grin. Diane's eyes drifted over the wide porch, the stone chimney, the acres of open land surrounding it. "Way too big for one man to live in," she said, tone soft, but sharpened at the edges. Franklin shrugged, gesturing toward the horizon. "Big enough for memories," he said. Ryan laughed awkwardly. "You know, Diane, always thinking practically." Inside, the house smelled of roasted chicken, herbs, and the faint trace of wood polish. Franklin had spent the morning preparing, setting the table the way Maggie used to, even folding the napkins into triangles she'd liked. Diane walked slowly through each room, eyes cataloging, not admiring. Her gaze lingered a beat too long on the framed deed above Franklin's office door. Dinner began with polite chatter. Ryan talked about work, new clients, stressful deadlines. Diane chimed in occasionally, each comment sliding toward how expensive everything's gotten lately. Franklin listened, smiling when expected, nodding when silence stretched too long. He poured wine, his own glass mostly untouched. When the conversation lulled, Franklin leaned back and said softly, "You know, I've been thinking about the future of this place." Ryan looked up mid-bite. "Oh?" Franklin nodded, eyes on the window where the mountains darkened under gathering clouds. "Your mother and I always talked about turning the house into something lasting. Maybe a retreat for firefighters' families, or a donation to the department when I'm gone, a way to keep it useful." The clink of Diane's fork against her plate was sharp enough to make Ryan flinch. She stared at him, then at Franklin. "So strangers get it instead of your family?" she asked. Franklin blinked, caught off guard by her bluntness. "Not strangers," he said evenly. "People who need it." "Still sounds like strangers to me." Diane's tone was measured, but her jaw had tightened. "You've got a son, you know, a family. I'd think you'd want to keep it where it belongs." Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "Diane," he muttered, but she didn't look at him. Franklin's smile thinned. "Where it belongs," he repeated softly. "Funny, I thought that's what I've been trying to do." The room went still. The only sound was the faint crackle of the fire. Ryan forced a small laugh, trying to bridge the growing gap. "Let's not turn dinner into an estate meeting," he said, raising his glass. "To family." Franklin raised his own slowly. "To family," he echoed. But the warmth had drained from his voice. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The wind picked up, rattling the windows. Rain began to patter against the glass in uneven rhythms, soft at first, then harder, like impatient fingers tapping for attention. Diane reached for her glass, eyes glinting under the chandelier's light. "I just think some things should stay in the family," she said. Franklin's gaze met hers, steady and unreadable. "That depends on what you call family," he said quietly. Lightning flashed, illuminating the tension that had settled thick over the table. Ryan shifted, cleared his throat, and offered a forced smile neither of them returned. Outside, the storm broke open, rain thrumming against the roof, as if the house itself could sense what was coming. Inside, the silence was heavier than thunder, a silence that promised this dinner was only the beginning. The rain had washed the night clean, but the air still smelled of storm and tension. Franklin moved quietly through the kitchen that morning, the floorboards creaking beneath his slippers. The sun tried to slip through the clouds, but the light came weak and gray. Diane's voice floated in from the living room, sharp, clear, and far too loud for a private call. "Yes, I'm serious," she was saying, the kind of tone that didn't care who heard. "He's all alone up here, barely a real family anymore. It's sad, honestly." The words hit Franklin like a cold wind. He stopped mid-step, the mug in his hand trembling just slightly. He stood in the hallway, unseen, listening as Diane continued, her tone laced with false sympathy. He just wanders around that big old house. You'd think someone would step in before he gives it all away. Franklin's chest tightened, a low ache spreading under his ribs. There was no anger yet, just that slow, hollow realization that some truths weren't meant to be said out loud. He set the mug down on the counter with a soft clink and turned away before she could see him. His feet carried him to the garage, the one place that still smelled like purpose, metal, oil, and faint traces of smoke that never quite faded after a lifetime of fighting fires. The air was cold there, and it steadied him. He opened an old wooden chest tucked under his workbench. Inside were pieces of another life, helmets, photographs, a few burned gloves, and a single tarnished medal. He picked it up carefully, running his thumb over the engraved words, "For courage and brotherhood." He remembered the day he'd earned it, his crew pulling each other through smoke and chaos, no one left behind. Loyalty had been law, teamwork, sacred. He turned the medal over in his hand, eyes glassy with memory. "Family stands by you," he muttered to the quiet air. His voice cracked slightly, and he swallowed hard. "Not behind your back." For a while, he just stood there, the metal warm now in his palm, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Outside, he heard Ryan's voice calling, muffled through the walls. "Dad, you out here?" Franklin pocketed the medal and stepped back inside, wearing the practiced calm of a man who had weathered far worse flames. Ryan was at the table, flipping through a newspaper, coffee steaming beside him. Diane had vanished to another room, her perfume lingering faintly like smoke after a fire. "You okay?" Ryan asked without looking up. "Fine," Franklin said simply. Ryan chuckled. "Diane thinks you're too quiet. She says it's spooky how you sneak up on people." He grinned, glancing up now. "She was saying earlier you're all alone up here, barely a real family anymore." The words landed like a second strike, this time, intentional or not, delivered straight to his face. Franklin froze mid-motion. Ryan laughed lightly, as if it were a harmless joke. "Come on, Dad, don't take things so seriously." Something shifted in Franklin's eyes. The warmth drained, replaced by a calm that wasn't peace, it was precision. His hand tightened around the metal in his pocket until the edge bit into his skin. He looked at his son, really looked, and saw not the boy he raised, but the man who didn't notice how much damage a careless sentence could do. "You're right," Franklin said softly. "I don't take jokes well anymore." Ryan blinked, unsure whether his father was teasing back or warning him. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was heavy. It filled the room like smoke before a fire, unseen but unmistakable. Outside, the wind began to rise again, whispering against the windows. Franklin turned toward it slowly, the metal still clenched in his palm, and for the first time, his eyes went cold. By morning, the storm had passed, but the tension it left behind lingered like humidity after rain. The house was quiet again, too quiet. Franklin stood at the sink, rinsing the coffee pot, when he heard the sound of luggage wheels bumping down the hallway. Diane appeared first, perfectly dressed, as if she'd never spent a night outside the city. "We're going to head out early," she announced, her tone brisk, almost rehearsed. "Too much mountain air for me. I can't sleep up here." Ryan followed, carrying the suitcases, avoiding his father's eyes. "We'll come back soon, Dad," he said quickly, the words automatic, empty. Franklin forced a smile. "You sure you don't want breakfast first?" Diane waved her hand. "We grabbed something on the way out. You know how early checkouts get." She gave the house one last sweeping glance, her gaze lingering on the framed deed above the mantel before turning toward the door. Franklin walked them to the driveway. The gravel crunched under their shoes, every sound exaggerated in the morning stillness. Ryan gave a half-hearted hug. Diane offered a thin smile that never reached her eyes. "Take care of yourself," she said. Franklin nodded. "Always do." He watched as the SUV rolled down the hill, its tires spitting dust into the air until it vanished beyond the trees. He stood there long after the sound faded, hands in his pockets, that quiet ache blooming behind his ribs again. Every goodbye felt heavier these days, but this one felt different, hollow, incomplete. He went back inside, the silence pressing down harder than ever. The table still held their untouched wine glasses from the night before, a napkin folded neatly beside Diane's plate. It felt less like a visit and more like an inspection, though he couldn't say why. The day passed slowly. Franklin chopped wood, fixed a loose shingle, kept his hands busy so his thoughts wouldn't wander. By nightfall, he sat in his recliner with the radio on low, the soft hum of an old country song filling the background. Just as he started to doze, the phone rang. He reached for it, expecting Ethan maybe, or a telemarketer. "Hello?" "Evening, Frank. It's Tom from down the road." The neighbor's voice carried a hint of confusion. "Hey, I just wanted to check. Are you selling your place?" Franklin straightened. "Selling? No. Why?" "Well," Tom said, hesitating, "I was in town earlier, stopped by the realty office, saw your name on the listings board, said there's a preliminary inquiry about your property. Realtor said he met with your family this morning, said you were thinking of downsizing." Franklin's heart thudded once, hard and slow. "My family?" "That's what he said," Tom replied. "Ryan Cole, his wife. They met him at the cafe next to the office. Said you sent them to get things started." The line went silent for a long second. Franklin stared at the wall, the radio's soft tune still playing somewhere far away. "Thanks, Tom," he said quietly. "Must be some kind of mix-up." "Sure thing. Just thought you should know." Franklin hung up the phone with care, as if afraid it might break from the weight of the truth settling in. He sat there for a moment, unmoving. Then he rose, walked slowly to the mantel, and looked up at Maggie's picture, the one where her smile looked like sunlight. His reflection in the glass was tired, small but steady. He exhaled through his nose, a long, quiet release. "So, that's how it is," he murmured. He walked to the window, staring into the night. The porch light flickered faintly, throwing long shadows across the yard. The house felt different now, not safe, not sacred. It had become something else, a target. He whispered the words, more to himself than to the room. "You don't even have a family, huh?" The line hung in the air, heavy, final, but not defeated. Outside, the wind moved through the trees again, slow and deliberate, as though the mountains themselves had paused to listen. Inside, Franklin's expression hardened. Not grief this time, not shock, just quiet, gathering resolve. Something inside him had shifted, and whatever came next would not catch him by surprise. The morning after Tom's call broke colder than usual. Frost glazed the truck windshield, catching the first light of dawn. Franklin scraped it away with methodical calm, his movements measured, deliberate. The night's shock had hardened into something else, clarity. Whatever his son and Diane were plotting, he wouldn't sit and wait for the next phone call to tell him how far it had gone. The road down to town was quiet, the kind of mountain drive where the radio signal cut in and out, and a man's thoughts got too loud. His mind replayed every detail of the weekend. Diane's stares at the deed, her tone, the sudden rush to leave. By the time he reached Colorado Springs and parked in front of the county records office, the truth was no longer just a suspicion. It was a fire in his chest. Inside, the building smelled of paper, toner, and the faint metallic tang of old air conditioning. The clerk at the counter looked up from her computer. "Morning. What can I help you with?" Franklin leaned against the counter, voice calm but firm. "Name's Franklin Cole. I need to see any pending documentation involving my property, Parcel 6B on Ridgeway Drive." The woman frowned. "Pending documentation?" She typed quickly, the clack of keys echoing. After a pause, her eyes flicked up. "Looks like there's a preliminary authorization for property reassignment filed last week, in review for verification." Franklin's stomach tightened. "Reassignment?" "Yes, sir." She printed out a few pages and handed them over. "Here's the copy on record." He scanned the document, pulse quickening. At the top, preliminary sale inquiry, authorized by next of kin on behalf of owner. Below that, his own name typed neatly, but the signature beside it wasn't his. It was shaky, uneven, but close enough to fool someone who didn't know better. And just beneath it, in darker ink, authorized representative Diane Cole. For a long moment, he didn't move. The edges of the paper trembled in his hands, but his face stayed unreadable. "Something wrong?" the clerk asked quietly. Franklin folded the paper, tucking it into his jacket pocket. "Not yet," he said, "but it will be." He drove straight to an old office on the corner of Maple and Fifth. A sign above the door still read, "Carter and Finch, Real Estate Law." The name Carter wasn't just another lawyer to him. It was Thomas Carter, one of his oldest friends, a man who'd helped him and Maggie buy the property 30 years ago. Inside, the waiting area looked the same. Stacks of files, a coffee pot burning stale grounds, the faint hum of ceiling lights. Carter stepped out of his office when he heard the door chime. "Well, I'll be damned, Franklin Cole." His smile faded as soon as he saw his friend's expression. "What's going on?" Franklin handed him the folded papers without a word. Carter read them slowly, his eyes narrowing. "This signature's not yours, and this—" He tapped Diane's name. "This makes it fraud. They're staging a quiet takeover, Frank, probably hoping the trust verification passes without anyone flagging it." Franklin leaned against the doorframe, the old firefighter's calm, returning like muscle memory. "How clean is it?" "Messy," Carter said. "If I didn't know your handwriting from half our bar tabs back in the day, I'd almost buy it. They used digital scans of your old mortgage paperwork. Someone inside must have helped them mock this up." Franklin's jaw tightened. "So they think I'm too old, too tired to notice?" Carter sighed. "You want me to open a case?" Franklin's eyes stayed on the document spread across the desk. The anger wasn't loud. It was focused now, cool and sharp. "No," he said finally. "Not yet." Carter frowned. "Then what do you want to do?" Franklin took the paper back, folding it carefully as though it were something fragile. "They wanted a stage," he said quietly, his tone shifting from disbelief to strategy. "Let's give them the stage." Carter studied him for a long moment. "Frank, what are you planning?" Franklin looked up, eyes clear, voice steady. "Something they won't see coming." Outside, the morning sun had burned off the frost, but the air stayed cold. Franklin walked back to his truck, the counterfeit signature heavy in his pocket. He didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he sat there in silence, watching the people of the town go about their ordinary day, unaware that, for him, everything had just changed. His reflection in the rearview mirror looked different now, not just older, but sharper, determined. The first flicker of revenge had begun to burn, small and controlled, waiting for air. The drive home from the county office was long and silent. The mountains loomed steady against the sky, but inside Franklin, something was shifting, slowly, deliberately. He'd spent a lifetime running toward fires. This time, he would start one. By evening, he sat at his desk, the house dim, except for the soft lamp glow. His phone rested beside a yellowed notebook. He flipped to a blank page, wrote a single heading across the top in bold block letters, Phase 1, Silence. He stared at the words for a long moment before reaching for his phone and dialing a number he hadn't used in months. The line clicked twice before a young, energetic voice answered. "Uncle Frank? Man, it's been forever." "Ethan," Franklin said, his tone even, controlled. "I need your help, and I need you to listen before you say yes." That got the nephew's attention. "You sound serious. What's going on?" Franklin told him everything, from the call, the forged paperwork, down to Diane's name on the authorization line. He kept it factual, not emotional, but the weight of it hung in every word. When he finished, there was a pause on the other end. "Damn," Ethan said finally. "I knew she was bad news. Ryan's too soft, but she's calculating." Franklin's voice dropped. "Can you track their digital paper trail, emails, documents, anything that connects her to this forgery?" There was a click of a keyboard in the background. "If she left any digital fingerprints, I'll find them. But you can't just go straight at them, Uncle Frank. If you tip your hand, she'll cover her tracks fast." "I know," Franklin replied, His tone was calm, almost cold. That's why I'm not tipping it. What do you mean? I'm going quiet, he said. I'll act exactly how they expect me to. Old, slow, confused. Let her think she's winning. People like her always get careless when they think they're smarter. Ethan was silent for a moment, then a slow grin crept into his voice. You're going to bait her. Just like a fire, Franklin said. Feed it oxygen till it burns too hot to control. They hung up with a plan. Ethan would begin tracing the electronic filings, digging through county records and realtor communications while Franklin played the fool. That night, Franklin sat at his kitchen table, drafting his next move. He picked up his phone and sent a simple text to Ryan. Forgot where I left the tax papers again. Do you still have copies? He waited. Diane responded within minutes from Ryan's number. We'll take care of it, Dad. Don't stress yourself. The hook had been set. Over the next few days, Franklin leaned into the role. He sent short, fragmented texts, misspelled words, slow replies. He even forgot a phone conversation mid-sentence once, apologizing with a shaky laugh. Ryan's messages grew shorter, Diane's longer. She started asking questions she wouldn't have dared before. Do you remember which bank handles your mortgage? We can update your online account for you, make things easier. Franklin let her. Every word she sent became another thread for Ethan to pull. By the end of the week, Ethan called again. Uncle Frank, you were right. She's been logging into your property tax account from her laptop. Twice this week, I've got screenshots. Franklin didn't smile, but his eyes sharpened. Good. Let her keep going. He closed his notebook, marking the end of the page with a steady hand. Phase 1. Silence was underway, and it was working. Diane's confidence was growing, her restraint slipping with every fake act of senility he performed. At night, Franklin would sit in his darkened living room, the only light coming from the faint reflection of the mountains beyond the window. The house that once felt lonely now felt alive, alert. He wasn't just waiting anymore. He was watching. And as Diane's carelessness bloomed like smoke before a blaze, Franklin Cole, retired firefighter, widower, forgotten father, watched the first flames of betrayal catch and burn, quietly preparing for the fire to come. The following week began with a plan disguised as a favor. Ethan's old pickup rumbled up Franklin's driveway early one morning, the bed filled with toolboxes, cables, and a roll of coaxial wire. The two men greeted each other with the quiet respect of family, who'd both been through things they didn't need to discuss. Uncle Frank, Ethan said, hopping out of the truck, got your message. You said you needed a little home security upgrade? Franklin gave a small nod, lips curling in something that wasn't quite a smile. You could say that. They carried the gear inside, Ethan chatting casually as he unpacked the equipment. To anyone listening, it was just a simple installation, a nephew helping his aging uncle stay safe in his empty home. But the details were anything but ordinary. Small black cameras, barely larger than shirt buttons, went up in corners and beneath shelves. One in the kitchen light fixture, another tucked near the mantel facing the living room, one hidden in the hallway where the family photos hung. Each motion triggered, each streaming silently to a cloud account, Ethan encrypted himself. If she shows up again, Ethan murmured, adjusting a wire beneath the desk, you'll see everything. Franklin stood nearby, his hands clasped behind his back. And she will, he said. They always come back when they think you're too weak to stop them. When the installation was done, Ethan demonstrated the system on his laptop. The feeds blinked to life, quiet, steady, watching. The sight of his own home on screen made Franklin's chest tighten. The house had always been his sanctuary. Now it was bait. Later that week, the phone rang again. Diane's voice came through Syrup Sweet. Frank, it's me. Just checking in. Ryan's swamped at work, so I thought I'd come up and help you with bills and stuff this weekend. You know, keep you organized. Franklin's reply was perfectly measured. That's kind of you, Diane. You always were good with paperwork. He hung up, staring at the receiver, his face unreadable. Saturday morning, she arrived in her polished SUV, wearing a cardigan and an overly bright smile. You didn't have to clean up for me, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. You just sit. I'll handle the boring stuff. Franklin watched from his armchair, slow and deliberate in his movements, playing his part. "Everything's on the desk," he said, nodding toward the stack of folders beside the computer. Diane got to work, flipping through envelopes and documents, every so often pulling out her phone to snap discrete photos. "You've got some of these payments on auto, right?" she asked, not looking up. "I think so," Franklin said softly, his tone fogged with just enough confusion. As she worked, one of the hidden cameras caught every frame, her hands rifling through property deeds, her fingers brushing against the trust documentation, the screen of her phone glowing as she took pictures. The lens even caught the moment she smirked faintly, as though she were already rehearsing the victory in her head. In the basement, a small receiver hummed quietly. Ethan, monitoring the live feed from his apartment in Denver, hit record on his software and labeled the file in neat digital type, Evidence, Phase 2. When Diane finally stood to leave, she tucked her phone back into her purse, beaming. "You're in good hands, Frank," she said, patting his shoulder like a nurse comforting a patient. Franklin met her gaze, for just a second too long. "I know," he said quietly. After she drove away, the house felt heavy again, but not empty this time. It felt like a trap set perfectly. That night, Franklin sat at the dining table, spreading the printouts Ethan had sent him across the wood grain. Screenshots of Diane's phone activity, stills from the cameras, timestamps matching every deceitful smile she'd given him. He took a manila envelope from the drawer, slid the photos inside, and sealed it. The name he wrote across the front in careful, steady handwriting, Mr. Thomas Carter. Outside, the post wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of snow and pine. Franklin stepped onto the porch, the envelope in hand, and slipped it into the outgoing mail bin. His movements were slow but sure, the calm precision of a man who'd once fought chaos for a living. As he turned back toward the door, a flicker of satisfaction crossed his face. Barely there, gone as quickly as it came. Inside, the cameras blinked red one by one, capturing the empty rooms, the quiet house now fully alive with purpose. The groundwork was done. The revenge wasn't loud, not yet, but it had begun breathing. And in the silence of the mountain night, Franklin Cole's patience sharpened like the edge of a blade waiting for its moment. The mountain air was clean that Friday morning, clear enough to see the valley stretch for miles. Franklin had packed light, just a fishing pole, a thermos, and a week's worth of quiet. He locked the door behind him, a motion that once meant safety, but now felt symbolic, as though he were sealing a story that others were already rewriting behind his back. He spent the weekend by the lake where he and Maggie used to camp. The water was glass still, the only ripples from his line touching its surface. He didn't fish much. He mostly sat in silence, thinking about the cameras, about the evidence Ethan was gathering, and about how easily trust turned into ammunition in the wrong hands. By Sunday evening, the shadows over the water had grown long, and he packed up his gear, ready to return to the one place that still felt like his. But when he turned up his driveway, something was wrong. His chest tightened before his mind could name it. There was a moving van parked crooked by the porch. The front door was wide open, curtains fluttering like warning flags. He killed the engine and stepped out slowly. From inside came the sound of footsteps, voices, laughter that didn't belong. He moved through the doorway like a man entering a stranger's home, and maybe, in that moment, he was. The living room was chaos. Boxes half opened, furniture shifted, his old recliner pushed aside to make room for Diane's polished white sofa. Ryan was bent over, unwrapping framed pictures that weren't his. Diane stood in the center of it all, hair tied back, sleeves rolled, directing like a foreman at a job site. She looked up first, her smirk quick and practiced. "Oh," she said lightly, brushing a stray hair from her face. "We thought you'd be gone longer." Franklin didn't move. His fishing rod hung loosely at his side, the faint drip of lake water marking time between them. Ryan turned, grinning like he could still make this normal. "Hey, Dad, we figured we'd help redecorate while you were away. Thought the place could use a woman's touch." Franklin's eyes moved over the room, his wedding photo taken off the wall, the tablecloth Maggie had embroidered now folded on a pile of things to donate. His heartbeat stayed steady, his breathing even. But inside, the fury burned cold and deliberate. He took one slow step forward. Redecorate? Diane crossed her arms, her tone syrupy. You said yourself the house needed work. We just thought we'd get a head start. He studied her, not with anger, but with something more dangerous, calm understanding. So, he said softly, you think you're staying? Ryan laughed awkwardly. Come on, Dad. Don't make it sound weird. We just want to help. Diane's smile sharpened. We're family, right? The silence that followed was so thick it seemed to mute the ticking clock on the mantel. Franklin looked at her for a long moment, then at Ryan, his son, who couldn't meet his gaze. The quiet stretched until it felt like the air itself was bending under the weight of it. Finally, Franklin's mouth curved in the faintest hint of a smile. Not warmth, not forgiveness, something colder. Family, he echoed, as though tasting the word to see if it still meant what it used to. Diane stepped closer, emboldened by his restraint. You've been alone too long, she said. This house deserves life again. Franklin nodded slowly, eyes drifting across the room. It does, he murmured. It deserves something honest in it. Ryan cleared his throat, eager to escape the tension. We'll get dinner started soon, he said quickly. You go unpack, Dad. But Franklin didn't move. He just watched them, two people who had already written him out of his own story, and felt that cold patience settling in deeper, steady as the heartbeat of someone who had no intention of losing. He turned toward the door, his voice calm, almost too calm. Don't wait up, he said quietly, then stepped outside into the fading light. From the porch, he looked back once. Through the window, Diane was laughing at something Ryan said, her reflection flickering in the glass. Franklin's eyes stayed on her for a long beat, unreadable. Then he smiled, a small, deliberate smile, and walked into the dusk, the sound of the lake wind whispering through the trees, like the beginning of a reckoning. The morning after the redecoration, Franklin stood outside Carter's law office with a brown envelope tucked neatly under his arm. The small-town streets were quiet, snow melting in thin ribbons along the curbs. He looked calm, too calm for a man whose home was being stolen piece by piece. Inside, the receptionist recognized him immediately and waved him through. He's in his office, Mr. Cole. Go right in. Thomas Carter looked up from his desk, glasses perched low on his nose. Frank, he said, rising. You look like hell. What happened? Franklin set the envelope down between them. They moved in, he said simply. Carter frowned. Who? My son and his wife. The lawyer's brow furrowed as he opened the envelope. Inside were printed stills from the security cameras, Diane opening drawers, photographing documents, Ryan carrying furniture through the door like a man convinced of ownership. Carter flipped through them, his face hardening. Good Lord, you could sue them for this. Elder coercion, fraud, hell, maybe even theft. Franklin's reply came quietly, steady as stone. No, he said. I'll educate them. Carter leaned back in his chair, studying his old friend. You've got something in mind. Franklin nodded once. They want the house so badly? Let's make sure they can never touch it. It didn't take Carter long to understand. He opened a drawer, pulling out a thin stack of legal forms. You're talking about a trust then, protective deed transfer. Temporary, Franklin said, just long enough to keep their hands off it. Carter flipped through the forms with the ease of a man who'd done this 100 times before. Whose name do you want on it? Martha's, Franklin said without hesitation. She always said this home was meant for more than us. Carter nodded approvingly. You sure about that? Once it's filed, the property's under the trust, only reversible by your say-so. They'll have no idea until it's too late. That's the idea, Franklin said. The lawyer set to work, typing up the documentation, every keystroke echoing faintly in the quiet office. Franklin watched in silence, his expression unreadable, his hands folded neatly on his knee. There was a certain calm in him now, not peace, but purpose. When the printer finally hummed to life, Carter gathered the papers into a neat stack and slid them across the desk. Langford Living Trust, he said, tapping the top page where the title was stamped in black ink. named after your wife's family, just as she would have wanted. Franklin traced the letters with his thumb. Langford Living Trust. The words carried weight, history, and the perfect disguise. You're a good man, Tom, Carter smirked. I'm a lawyer, Frank. That's close enough some days. They both signed, notarized, and sealed the final page. Carter placed his pen down and looked across the desk. They'll think they've won, he said. You understand that? At least for a little while. Franklin's lips twitched, a faint smile ghosting across them. Let them move in, he said, quietly. Let them celebrate. The higher they climb, the harder the fall. Carter studied him, then leaned back. You always did prefer a quiet fight. Franklin rose, taking the papers with him, tucking them under his arm, as he had the envelope earlier. A firefighter doesn't rush into a blaze, Tom, he said, his voice low and deliberate. He waits until it's hot enough to matter. The lawyer gave a slow nod. Then you'd better get ready. This is going to burn. Franklin paused at the door, glancing over his shoulder. It already is. Outside, the cold bit at his skin as he stepped into the daylight. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and snow, clean and sharp. He stood there for a long moment, looking toward the mountains where the sky met the peaks. In his pocket, the trust documents rustled softly, a quiet weapon made of ink and patience. The first legal whisper of revenge had been signed and sealed, and somewhere back up that mountain road, Diane Cole was decorating a house she no longer owned. The next few days passed in deliberate silence. Franklin went about his mornings the same way, coffee, porch, the steady creak of his old rocking chair. But there was a new stillness behind his calm. Every motion, every word, was calculated. He didn't need to make a move now. Diane would do that for him, and she did. Tuesday morning, a sleek black sedan rolled into the downtown district of Colorado Springs, pulling up in front of Langford Realty, the most reputable agency in town. Diane Cole stepped out, hair perfectly styled, heels clicking across the pavement with self-assured rhythm. Inside her purse sat a folder stuffed with printouts, copies of ownership papers she and Ryan had prepared, forged signatures and all. The receptionist smiled politely. Good morning. Do you have an appointment? Diane Cole, she replied crisply. I'm here about a residential property, Ridgeway Drive. My father-in-law is ready to downsize, so I'm handling the sale on his behalf. The receptionist nodded and motioned toward an office door. Mr. Dugan will see you now. The realtor, mid-50s, polished but tired, shook Diane's hand and gestured for her to sit. Always nice to meet a Cole, he said warmly. That property's a gem. Mountain View, private lot, it'll go fast. Diane smiled, the kind of smile that meant she already saw the dollar signs. I'm glad you think so. I'd like to get it listed immediately. He looked through her papers, flipping page after page. His expression began to change, brows furrowing, eyes narrowing. He murmured. Strange. Diane's smile faltered slightly. Something wrong? The realtor cleared his throat. These documents show ownership under a trust. He turned the page toward her. Langford Living Trust. That means your father-in-law doesn't technically own the property directly anymore. Whoever manages the trust would have to authorize any sale. Diane blinked. Excuse me? I'm saying this isn't his property to sell, not legally. Her voice sharpened. What do you mean it's not his property? It's his house. I'm afraid not, the realtor replied calmly. The title's been transferred. It's sealed under the trust's name. Unless you're the trustee of record, which I don't see here, you can't list it, let alone sell it. Diane's composure cracked. She snatched the papers back, flipping through them as if she might find a hidden loophole in the margins. That can't be right, she hissed. He doesn't even know how to file that kind of paperwork. He barely uses email. Mr. Dugan gave a small, apologetic smile. Well, someone did, and it's airtight. Happens more often than you'd think. Families try to get ahead of an estate, but the law usually beats them to it. Diane stood abruptly, her voice rising. Do you have any idea who I'm talking about? That's my husband's family home. We have rights. People in the nearby offices turned to look. The realtor kept his tone even. Ma'am, I'm just telling you what the records say. The Langford Trust owns that house. It's untouchable. Outside, parked across the street in his rust-colored truck, Franklin Cole watched through the windshield. He'd been sitting there for nearly half an hour, engine off, hat pulled low, eyes steady. He couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. Diane's gestures, sharp, frantic, desperate, told the story clearly enough. He leaned back, voice barely above a whisper. Lesson 1, he murmured, read before stealing. Across the street, Ethan sat in a corner booth of a small cafe, laptop open, camera lens discreetly trained through the window. He captured every moment, Diane's flailing hands, the realtor's calm detachment, her face collapsing into disbelief. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he saved the footage and labeled it neatly. Evidence, Phase 3. When Diane stormed out of the building, her heels striking pavement like gunshots, she didn't notice the two sets of eyes on her. She yanked open her car door, phone already pressed to her ear. Her voice carried, sharp and uncontrolled. Ryan, he's outsmarted us. The house isn't even his anymore. Franklin watched her drive off, the tires spitting gravel as she disappeared down the street. He exhaled through his nose, the faintest hint of a smile forming. For the first time in months, the weight in his chest felt lighter, not from victory, but from control. Back in the cafe, Ethan sent him a text. Got it. Uploading tonight. Franklin didn't respond right away. He just stared out the windshield, watching the realtor's office door close, the world returning to its ordinary calm. Then, slowly, he started the engine and pulled away, gravel crunching under his tires like punctuation. Behind him, the first quiet ripples of their downfall were already beginning to spread, one video, one whisper at a time. The gossip started small, like wind through dry grass, quiet, harmless, until it caught flame. Colorado Springs was the kind of town where privacy didn't last long, and Franklin knew it. He didn't have to shout the truth. All he had to do was let it breathe. It began with a single conversation at the hardware store. Franklin was picking up light bulbs when Tom, his neighbor from down the hill, spotted him. Heard your son's been up there moving furniture again, Tom said with a knowing grin. Finally moving back in? Franklin smiled mildly, adjusting his hat. Oh no, they're just house-sitting while I handle some paperwork, helping me out for a bit. His tone was casual, dismissive, just the right amount of calm to sound authoritative. Tom nodded slowly, processing it the way small towns do, half believing, half curious. Well, good of them to help. They sure act like they own the place, though. Saw Diane giving orders to the landscaper yesterday. Franklin chuckled softly. Diane likes things tidy, he said, then turned the conversation to something else, letting that one truth. They're just house-sitting, settle in naturally, like a rumor wearing honesty's clothes. By midweek, it was everywhere. The grocery clerk mentioned it in passing. The postman asked jokingly if Franklin needed mail forwarded to his caretakers. Each time, Franklin gave the same calm, measured answer. Just house-sitting. I still pay the taxes. Word spread through the neighborhood like a slow-moving current, and before long, everyone had an opinion. Some thought Ryan and Diane were being kind. Others whispered that it seemed opportunistic. Either way, the story was out of Franklin's hands now, and right where he wanted it to be. Inside the house, Diane began to notice the shift. It started with a few strange looks at the grocery store. The woman at the bakery asked if she was enjoying her stay. The bank teller mentioned, "It must be nice of your father-in-law to lend you his place for a while." Each comment chipped at her composure. Lend, she repeated once under her breath, forcing a tight smile. By the time she got back to the house, she was seething. Ryan found her pacing the kitchen, phone in hand. What's wrong now? Everyone in town thinks we're just house-sitting, she snapped. Your father's telling people this isn't even our home. Ryan sighed, rubbing his temple. Maybe you shouldn't care what people think. He probably doesn't mean anything by it. Diane turned on him, her voice low and trembling. You don't get it, Ryan. He's not senile. He's mocking us. He's playing dumb to make me look crazy. Ryan hesitated, doubt flickering in his eyes. Maybe you're reading too much into it. Oh, am I? She shot back. Then why did the landscaper tell me he already cleared payments with your dad? Why did the neighbors act like we're temporary guests? Ryan didn't have an answer. That afternoon, Franklin made another quiet move. He called up Sheriff Danner, an old acquaintance from his fire department days. "Morning, Sheriff," he said lightly. "You free for a cup of coffee tomorrow?" The sheriff chuckled. "If it's your brew, I'll make the drive." They met on the porch the next day, the mountain wind carrying the scent of pine through the stillness. The conversation was easy: weather, retirement, local gossip, until the sheriff leaned back in his chair. "So," he said, smiling faintly, "what's this I hear about squatters up on Ridgeway Drive?" Franklin's expression didn't change. "Oh, that," he said, pouring another cup. "Just family helping out, but you know how stories grow legs." The sheriff chuckled again, but his eyes said he was taking note. "Well, good to know the place is still yours. You'd be surprised how often folks try to jump title on an old man's property these days." Franklin nodded. "You don't say." The casual remark traveled further than either man needed to push it. By the end of the week, half the neighborhood knew that the sheriff had stopped by to check on things. The other half assumed Franklin had called about trespassers. Either way, the result was the same. Ryan and Diane found themselves surrounded by polite smiles that now hid judgment. Diane stopped going into town altogether. She drew the curtains tighter, muttering under her breath as she scrolled through messages she couldn't control. Ryan avoided the neighbors, his head down, embarrassed by whispers he couldn't silence. Meanwhile, Franklin kept his schedule steady. Morning coffee, afternoon walk, evening porch light glowing like nothing was wrong. But inside, he was watching the cracks widen, her composure fraying, his son shrinking under shame. And one evening, as he stood by the window, watching Diane close the blinds in agitation, he allowed himself a single quiet breath of satisfaction. The storm had started again, but this one he controlled completely. By Thursday morning, the gossip had turned to pressure. Diane's patience was unraveling. The whispers, the stares, the pity. It was too much. She paced the living room like a trapped animal, phone clutched tight in her hand. Ryan sat at the kitchen table, shoulders heavy, his voice low when he finally spoke. "Diane, this can't go on," he said. "You're driving yourself crazy." She spun toward him. "He's doing this. Your father's manipulating everyone. You think people just randomly started calling me a house sitter?" Ryan rubbed his face. "Maybe we just talk to him, make it official. If he signs the house over..." Diane cut in sharply. "Exactly. That's the only way this ends." By evening, Ryan found his father out on the porch, watching the sunset bleed through the trees. He took a breath, then stepped forward, voice measured but desperate. "Dad, can we talk?" Franklin didn't turn. "We can always talk," he said. Ryan came closer, wringing his hands. "Look, this thing between you and Diane, it's tearing everyone apart. She's stressed. The neighbors are talking. It's..." Franklin's eyes flicked toward him, calm but cold. "She's the one who built this mess, son. I'm just letting her live in it." Ryan sighed. "Then stop it. Just sign the house over. End the drama. Keep the peace." The words landed like a slap. Franklin turned fully now, his voice low, steady. "Peace doesn't live in theft." Ryan flinched at the tone. "Dad, please." "Son," Franklin interrupted, his voice dropping into a calm finality. "You can't build peace on a lie. You can paint it, decorate it, feed it, but it's still rot underneath." Before Ryan could answer, Diane appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes blazing. "You think you're clever," she said, each word a blade. "Playing the poor old man while you turn everyone against us." Franklin said nothing. "You think this little rumor game will last? We'll take this to court if we have to," she snapped. "You can't keep what you don't even remember." For a heartbeat, the air froze between them. Then Franklin's voice broke the silence, soft, deliberate, dangerous. "Try me." Diane blinked, taken aback by the calm steel in his tone. "Excuse me." He leaned slightly forward in his chair, eyes steady on hers. "Go on," he said. "Try me." Something in his composure made her falter. Her threat, rehearsed and sharp, suddenly felt small in the face of his stillness. At that exact moment, across town, Ethan pressed a single key on his keyboard. The first video clip went live. On screen, Diane's voice, crisp and unmistakable from the hidden camera footage weeks earlier. "He won't remember a thing," she said with a laugh. "It'll be easy once the paperwork's through." Within an hour, it spread like wildfire. Comments flooded in. "Elder abuse. Disgusting. Greedy witch." Local groups shared it. A small online paper picked up the story under the headline, "Couple tries to trick retired firefighter into losing home." By dinner, the entire town knew. Inside the house, the silence was unbearable. Diane sat stiffly at the table, her phone face down, notifications lighting up the screen like sparks. Ryan stared at his plate, ashamed to look up. Franklin ate slowly, unbothered, the quiet hum of the clock filling the room. No one spoke. When the phone finally stopped buzzing, Franklin set down his fork and folded his hands. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Funny how fast truth travels when it's finally allowed to speak." Ryan's face fell. Diane said nothing. Her control had cracked, and everyone in that room could feel it. Outside, thunder rolled over the mountains, faint but growing. Franklin stood, collected his plate, and placed it in the sink. "Eat while it's warm," he said, his tone almost kind. Then he left the room, his footsteps slow and measured down the hall, leaving behind a silence that said more than words ever could. The balance had shifted, and they all knew it. It started with a headline no one expected to see in their local feed. "Couple tries to steal retired father's home." The video, grainy, time-stamped, and damning, opened with Diane's unmistakable voice. "He won't remember a thing," she said, laughing, her tone dripping with arrogance. The clip was only 30 seconds long, but it didn't need to be longer. It hit like a match in dry grass. By noon, it had spread across social media, first the local Facebook groups, then neighborhood forums, then regional news pages. People commented faster than the moderators could keep up. "This poor man. Monsters. They need to be arrested." By nightfall, the story reached the evening news. The anchor's tone was smooth, almost theatrical. "A viral video out of Colorado Springs is sparking outrage tonight after a couple allegedly attempted to take ownership of a retired firefighter's home. Sources confirm the man, Franklin Cole, 69, has since secured his property under a legal trust." The words replayed in living rooms across the state. Diane's face, blurred but recognizable, filled the screen beside Ryan's. Underneath their image, the caption burned, "Greed at its worst." Diane's phone exploded with messages, friends, colleagues, her boss. She tried to deny it, claim it was taken out of context, but no one bought it. Her name became shorthand for deceit. By Friday, she received the email she'd been dreading: termination notice, conduct unbecoming of employee standards. She sat in the kitchen with the letter in her hands, staring at the words until they blurred. "It's not fair," she whispered. "It's not—" But Ryan wasn't listening. He was already on the back porch, phone off, eyes hollow. Cameras had started showing up. Local reporters, bloggers, people with cell phones hoping for a reaction shot. He couldn't go to work without seeing whispers behind every glance. "I didn't know," he told one reporter through the crack of the door. "I swear I didn't know what she was doing." But his voice trembled, and no one believed him. Back up the mountain, Franklin didn't turn on the TV. He didn't need to. He could feel the shift in the air, the quiet satisfaction of justice working without his hand forcing it. The sun hung low over the ridge as he knelt in his garden, pulling weeds between rows of early spring vegetables. His gloves were worn, the dirt cool and familiar. He worked slowly, deliberately, as the hum of distant chatter reached him from the road. Neighbors were talking again, but this time, not in whispers. Tom, the man from down the hill, stopped by the fence line holding a thermos. "Heard about the video, Frank," he said with a grin. "Good for you." Franklin smiled faintly, brushing dirt from his palms. "Didn't do much," he said. Tom chuckled. "Sometimes doing nothing's the smartest thing a man can do." He handed over the thermos, black coffee steaming in the cool air. "You earned this one." Throughout the week, more visitors came. Mrs. Price from across the road brought a pie. The mail carrier left an extra letter in his box, Just a note that said, "Glad you're getting the peace you deserve." Through it all, Franklin said very little. He didn't boast, didn't gloat. He watered the garden, swept the porch, and fixed a loose hinge on the gate. Each act of normalcy felt like a declaration that the chaos had finally shifted outward, away from his home, into the world that now saw the truth. Inside, the house was quiet again, but it wasn't lonely this time. It was peaceful. Out by the road, the sheriff's cruiser slowed as it passed, the officer tipping his hat in quiet acknowledgement. Franklin nodded back, expression steady. The calm after the storm had arrived, but it wasn't over. It was a pause, a deep breath before the next step. He walked back toward the house, the evening light stretching long across the garden rows, his voice barely a whisper. "Let them learn," he said. "The lesson's just begun." The courthouse in downtown Colorado Springs was a monument to quiet authority. Clean marble floors, tall windows that made everyone look smaller beneath the light. Franklin Cole walked through its glass doors, dressed in his old gray suit, the same one he'd worn to his wife's funeral. He carried no folder, no documents. He didn't need them. Everything that mattered was already in motion. Diane and Ryan were already inside the courtroom when he entered. Diane sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table, her posture a fragile imitation of confidence. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she didn't answer. Ryan sat beside her, head low, suit wrinkled, his hands folded tightly in his lap. At the defense table sat Mr. Thomas Carter, steady, composed, the kind of man who didn't raise his voice, because the truth always spoke loud enough. He glanced up as Franklin approached. "You ready?" he asked softly. Franklin gave a slow nod. "Been ready since they stepped on my porch." When the judge entered, everyone rose. Judge Harkness was a woman in her 60s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense. She settled her glasses on the bridge of her nose and looked over the file before her. "We're here on Cole v. Cole," she said, her tone clipped. "Plaintiff alleges undue manipulation and concealment of assets. Defendant contests the claim." Diane's attorney stood first. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is about deception. My client's father-in-law, Mr. Franklin Cole, was coerced into transferring his home under a fraudulent trust, an act he barely understood. This trust has caused my client emotional and financial hardship." The judge's gaze drifted toward Franklin. "Mr. Cole, did you understand what you were signing when you transferred your property into the Langford Living Trust?" Before Franklin could speak, Carter rose calmly. "Your Honor, if I may." He opened a folder and laid out several documents neatly on the table. "These are the trust papers in question, drawn, signed, and notarized in my office. You'll see here in my handwriting confirmation of Mr. Cole's full awareness and consent. And if that's not enough, there's this." He reached into his briefcase, retrieved a flash drive, and passed it to the clerk. A moment later, the courtroom monitors flickered to life. Diane's face appeared on screen, recorded weeks earlier, seated in Franklin's living room. Her voice was unmistakable. "He won't remember a thing," she said, laughing softly. "Once it's done, we'll finally have what's ours." The courtroom went still. The judge leaned back slowly, eyes narrowing. "Mrs. Cole," she said, her tone low but sharp. "That's your voice, correct?" Diane's mouth opened, then closed. It's out of context." Carter didn't interrupt. He simply handed the next document to the clerk. "Your Honor, I'd also like to enter into record the county's fraud investigation report confirming a forged signature filed under Mrs. Cole's name." The judge studied the papers for only a moment before setting them aside. "Enough," she said firmly. "This isn't elder manipulation, Mr. Carter. This is something else entirely." She looked at Diane, her tone cutting clean through the air. "This is elder abuse reversed." The words hit harder than any gavel could. Diane's lawyer stammered something about an appeal, but the judge was already shaking her head. "Case dismissed," she said flatly. "And Mrs. Cole, if I were you, I'd be grateful your father-in-law is kinder than this evidence suggests you deserve." The sound of the gavel echoed once, final, definitive. Franklin rose slowly, tipping his hat toward the judge. "Thank you, ma'am." He turned and walked out, his steps unhurried, shoulders squared. Behind him, Diane's voice rose in fury. "This isn't over." But even she seemed to know it was. Ryan followed her out, silent, his face pale with shame. Outside, the sky was overcast, the wind carrying that faint chill before rain. Franklin paused on the courthouse steps, taking in the cool air, the hum of traffic, the quiet sense of balance restored. Justice hadn't come with fireworks or vengeance. It had landed softly, measured, final, and true. He adjusted his hat, exhaled slowly, and walked toward his truck, the faintest trace of a smile at the corner of his mouth. The storm was over, but the story wasn't finished yet. The sound of tires on gravel carried through the morning fog. A sheriff's cruiser rolled up the long drive toward Franklin's house, followed by a moving van and a pair of deputies. The air was cool, mountain-scented, heavy with the kind of silence that comes before something final. Franklin stood on the porch, hands folded loosely in front of him. His old denim jacket hung open, wind brushing against his gray hair. He'd been up since dawn, calm and alert. He didn't need to be told what today was. It had been circled on the calendar of his patients for months. The sheriff stepped out first. "Morning, Frank," he said, voice low but respectful. "Morning, Danner," Franklin replied. From inside came the muffled chaos of movement, boxes slamming shut, hurried footsteps, curses under breath. Then the door flew open, and Diane emerged, her face pale with fury. Ryan followed close behind, eyes down, shoulders slumped. The sheriff nodded toward them. "Mrs. Cole, Mr. Cole, per court order, you're to vacate the premises today." Diane's laugh came sharp and bitter. "You people are unbelievable," she snapped. "This is our house." Franklin didn't move. "It was never yours," he said quietly. Her glare cut through the air. "You think you've won? You think humiliating us fixes anything?" Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with rage. "You ruined our lives." Franklin took a slow step forward, the wood of the porch creaking beneath his boots. His expression didn't change. "No," he said evenly, each word deliberate. "You built on lies. I just watched it fall." Diane's breath hitched, her defiance cracking just enough for the silence to sink in. She turned away sharply, muttering something under her breath as one of the deputies handed her the final notice. Ryan said nothing. He only nodded faintly to the sheriff and began carrying boxes toward the van, his movements small and defeated. Down by the road, another car door shut. Maggie Brown, Franklin's sister-in-law and his late wife, Martha's only sister, walked up the gravel path with slow, steady steps. She carried a thermos in one hand, her eyes soft with both sadness and pride. "You didn't tell me you were coming," Franklin said when she reached him. "Didn't have to," she replied, voice gentle. "I wasn't going to miss this." They stood side by side on the porch as the last pieces of furniture were loaded into the van. Diane slammed the door on her side and climbed into the passenger seat, refusing to look back. The sheriff gave a nod to Franklin before returning to his cruiser. "All done, Frank. Papers are final." When the vehicles started down the road, the gravel dust rose and shimmered in the sunlight. Franklin watched until they were gone, until the sound of the engine was nothing but memory. Maggie placed a hand on his arm. "Martha would be proud," she whispered. He turned toward her, eyes tired but calm. "She taught me patience," he said. "Told me once that fire burns fast, but truth burns slow." Maggie smiled softly. "And you let it burn just slow enough." Franklin exhaled, the tension of years leaving his shoulders all at once. He looked at the house, not as property, not as victory, but as something restored. "I didn't fight them," he said quietly. "I just built walls they couldn't see." The wind carried the words down the valley, rustling through the pines. Maggie squeezed his arm, her eyes shining with quiet admiration. They stood together for a moment longer, neither speaking, as the mountain light softened across the porch. The house, once invaded, now stood empty but peaceful, echoing not with loss, but with quiet justice. Franklin stepped off the porch and walked toward the garden, his boots leaving clean prints in the dirt. Behind him, Maggie watched in silence, the faintest smile on her face. For the first time in a long while, the world around him felt still and earned. But as the wind shifted and the echo of the departing van faded into the hills, Franklin knew this wasn't an ending. It was only the calm before the next chapter, the quiet breath before legacy took root. The first snow of early winter had begun to settle over Colorado Springs, quiet and clean, blanketing the earth like a reset. The air was sharp with cold, and Franklin Cole stood in his backyard, watching the frost trace its way across the garden fence. It had been a month since the eviction, 30 days of stillness, of a house finally breathing again. But peace for Franklin wasn't just about silence, it was about purpose. That morning, he'd driven down to the notary's office, documents neatly stacked under his arm, the same way he used to carry blueprints during his firefighting days. Mr. Carter had drawn them up perfectly, each clause written with care, each word chosen to protect something bigger than property. When he signed the last page, the ink sank into the paper like closure. By afternoon, it was official. Part of his land, 4 acres along the southern ridge, was now dedicated to the Cole Family Home Trust, a refuge for widowed firefighters and their families. "It's not charity," Franklin had told Carter. "It's continuation. These walls have seen enough grief. They might as well hold healing now." When the story broke, it spread fast. The Colorado Springs Gazette ran a front-page feature with the headline, "Retired Firefighter Turns Family Home into Sanctuary for Heroes' Families." The article painted him as something of a local legend, a man wronged by greed who turned pain into purpose. It included a photo of him standing in front of the property, snow falling around his shoulders, his old fire department jacket zipped to the collar. His eyes, calm and distant, looked almost like the mountains behind him, strong, still, unmovable. News stations picked it up next. Reporters called it a poetic act of grace. Former colleagues from the station sent him messages. "You always were the solid one, Cole," one said, "still protecting people even after the fires went out." He didn't answer most of them. He didn't need the applause. The truth was simpler. He'd spent years watching flames consume homes and families alike. Now, finally, he was building something that could outlast both. Across town, Diane saw the article too. The photo stared back at her from her phone, Franklin's name in bold above a headline she couldn't stop reading. "His house now saves lives." She scrolled through the comments, people calling him a hero, a symbol of decency, a man who chose legacy over revenge. Her hand trembled as she set the phone down. The small rental apartment around her felt colder suddenly, its walls too thin, its silence too loud. She told herself for weeks that he destroyed her life, but now, staring at that photo, she realized she'd destroyed her own. She pressed a hand to her eyes and sat there in the dark, tears slipping through her fingers. For the first time since everything fell apart, she didn't feel angry. She felt small and guilty. Meanwhile, Ryan was at his auto shop, the modest one he'd started after everything collapsed. Between fixing engines and balancing receipts, he saw the headline pop up on his feed too. He read every word twice, then sat back in his chair, staring blankly at the wall. That night, after closing the shop, he sat down at his laptop and wrote the hardest message he'd ever typed. "Dad, I saw what you did with the property. I don't know how to apologize for what I let happen. I forgot what home meant and who taught me what it was. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to tell you I understand now." He hovered over the send button for a long time, then pressed it, exhaling like he'd just stepped out of a burning building. The next morning, Franklin opened his email. He read his son's words twice, then leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the window where snow drifted past the glass. For a moment, the ache of loss stirred again, but it wasn't pain anymore. It was release. He typed one short line in reply, "Then rebuild it." He didn't sign it, didn't add anything more. He just hit send and sat there, the cursor blinking in the empty inbox like a quiet heartbeat. Across town, Ryan read the reply and stared at it for a long time. No lecture, no anger, just the truth, simple and absolute. And as the morning sun broke through the gray, something in him shifted. For the first time, he didn't feel condemned. He felt called. Back at the mountain house, Franklin stepped onto the porch, watching the snow fall across the field that would soon hold new walls. walls not meant to keep people out, but to bring others in. The air was cold, but inside him, a steady warmth was building. The house had gone from battleground to beacon, and for Franklin Cole, that was justice enough. The mountain road was dark and still that night, the kind of stillness that only comes after the first snow. Moonlight brushed over the pines, silvering the branches, softening every sound. A lone car crept up the gravel path, headlights dimmed, tires crunching quietly. Inside, Diane gripped the steering wheel tighter than she realized. The cold had fogged the edges of the windshield, but she didn't wipe it clean. She wasn't here to see clearly, just to see enough. The air in the car felt heavy, like it remembered all the things she wished she could take back. She parked halfway up the drive and cut the engine. The silence that followed was almost deafening. For a moment, she just sat there, staring up at the house she once tried to claim. It looked different now, stronger somehow, gentler too. Light glowed softly from a window on the second floor. She knew he was still awake. Franklin Cole didn't strike her as a man who slept easily anymore. Diane stepped out of the car, her boots crunching lightly in the snow. She walked slowly up the path, not daring to get too close to the porch. The air bit at her face, but she barely felt it. Every breath came out shaky, misting in the cold. The front yard had changed since she last saw it. A small wooden sign stood near the entrance of the new garden. It wasn't flashy, wasn't meant for cameras or headlines, just a simple bronze plaque glinting under the porch light. She knelt to read it, brushing away the thin dusting of snow. The words were engraved clean and deep, for families who remember love. The simplicity of it undid her. Her chest tightened, and before she could stop herself, tears spilled down her cheeks. She tried to swallow them, to stay composed, but the sound that left her wasn't a sob. It was something quieter, smaller. Regret had no volume. It just lingered in the air, patient and heavy. She touched the edge of the plaque, fingertips trembling. The metal was cold, but something in it felt alive, like warmth preserved through pain. Inside the house, Franklin stood at the window, the faint glow from his desk lamp outlining his figure. He saw her the moment she stepped out of the car. He'd watched her pause, walk, kneel. And now, as she cried in the stillness of the yard, he didn't move. He didn't open the door, didn't interrupt. There was nothing left to say. For a long moment, he just watched her, his expression unreadable but not unkind. The anger that once lived in him had burned itself out, leaving only quiet understanding. As he turned away from the window, his thoughts carried the words he would never speak aloud. Forgiveness isn't letting in, it's letting go. Down below, Diane stood, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve. She took one last look at the house, the home that had survived her, and somehow healed her too. She whispered something only the wind could hear. Maybe it was, "I'm sorry." Maybe it was nothing at all. Then she turned and walked back toward the car, her footsteps soft, fading into the snow. The engine started, headlights flaring once before the vehicle disappeared down the road, leaving the mountain quiet again. From his window, Franklin watched the last trace of light vanish between the trees. He stayed there for a while, listening to the echo of the moment, the house creaking gently, the night settling back into calm. Outside, the plaque caught the moonlight again, the words gleaming faintly in the cold. For families who remember love. The snow began to fall harder now, soft flakes covering her footprints until they were gone, as if the visit had never happened. The scene faded into stillness, slow, poetic, and absolute. Spring came late to Colorado that year, but when it finally arrived, it did so gently, melting snow revealing patches of green, wind carrying the scent of thawed pine and earth. Down in a smaller town, 2 hours from the mountains, a modest building sat at the edge of Main Street, Cole's Auto and Repair. The shop wasn't much, just 2 bays, a worn sign above the door, and a smell of oil that clung to everything. But it was honest. Ryan had spent months working toward this, 1 part redemption, 1 part survival. The day it opened, he stood outside in a clean shirt and grease-stained jeans, hanging the final "Open" banner with trembling hands. The local paper had sent a small photographer. Ethan stood across the street with his camera too, pretending to help with marketing, but in truth, he was there for something else, something personal. Inside, the new counter gleamed faintly under the fluorescent lights. The tools were organized, the floor swept clean. Ryan looked around, rubbing the back of his neck. Everything was simple, but it was his. He'd built this from nothing. He checked his watch for what must have been the 10th time. His father hadn't said whether he'd come. At 11:30, just as Ryan was about to busy himself under a hood to calm his nerves, the soft rumble of an old truck broke through the quiet street. It rolled to a stop outside the shop, engine idling low. Franklin stepped out slowly, hat in hand, his familiar denim jacket catching the sunlight. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Ryan froze, wiping his hands on a rag that didn't need it, eyes uncertain, hopeful, and afraid, all at once. "Looks good," Franklin said finally, voice steady. "Real good." Ryan nodded, forcing a smile. "It's small, but it's mine." Franklin looked around, the fresh paint, the simple tools, the sign above the door, and then back at his son. "Small's fine," he said, "so long as it's honest." The words hit deeper than Ryan expected. He exhaled, shaky, the weight of everything unsaid pressing between them. "Dad," he started, then stopped. He'd practiced a dozen speeches for this moment, but none of them felt right now, so instead, he said what mattered. "Thanks for coming." Franklin gave a single nod. "Wouldn't miss it." For a moment, the quiet between them felt like peace instead of distance. Then Ryan stepped forward, uncertain, and wrapped his arms around his father. It wasn't dramatic, just a simple, firm embrace, the kind men give when they've both made mistakes, but still choose to stand side by side. Franklin didn't hesitate this time. He hugged him back, solid and sure. "Guess we're family again?" Ryan said, his voice half laugh, half question. Franklin pulled back enough to look him in the eye. "Guess we always were," he replied softly. "You just forgot for a while." The words broke something loose in Ryan. He nodded, swallowing hard. The guilt, the shame, all the noise he'd been carrying seemed to quiet in that moment. What replaced it wasn't forgiveness. It was understanding. Outside, the wind picked up, flapping the new banner against the window. Ethan lowered his camera from across the street, a faint smile crossing his face as he hit record. One more time. He didn't plan to post this clip, didn't plan to share it online. This one was for the family, for proof that healing didn't always have to shout. Inside the shop, Franklin looked around one last time. "You'll do fine here," he said. "Work's honest. People respect that." Ryan nodded. "Trying to." He hesitated, then added quietly, "You ever think Mom would have forgiven me?" Franklin smiled, the lines in his face softening. "She'd have walked in here, seen what you built, and said it smells like her kitchen when I tried to cook." Ryan laughed, really laughed, and it was the first time Franklin had heard that sound in years. For a while, they just stood together, watching the sunlight spill through the open garage door, dust floating through the air like sparks from a dying fire. When Franklin finally turned to leave, Ryan called after him. "Hey, Dad?" Franklin looked over his shoulder. "Thanks for not giving up." Franklin nodded once, his expression quiet, proud. "Didn't see the point," he said. "Some things are worth rebuilding." He stepped outside, the bell above the door jingling softly as it closed behind him. Ethan caught the moment from a distance, father and son parting with something that looked a lot like peace. As Franklin walked toward his truck, the mountain wind swept through the street, lifting the edge of the banner that read, "Cole's Auto and Repair." Ethan framed the shot, the two men in the same frame for the first time in years, and hit save. The sound of the camera click was quiet, but it carried, like closure that didn't need words. And as Franklin drove off down the road, the image of the small shop grew smaller in the rearview mirror, but not farther. The space between them, for the first time in years, finally felt bridged. Closure was near, but not yet complete. The hall of the Colorado Springs Fire Department was filled to the brim that evening. Folding chairs lined in perfect rows, the air thick with the smell of coffee, waxed floors, and the faint hum of pride. Old uniforms hung along the walls in glass cases, memorials of the men and women who had served before. Franklin Cole's name had always been among them, carved on a small brass plate under a framed photo taken decades ago, back when the fire was still in his step and his hair still carried traces of black. Tonight, though, the hall wasn't about the past. It was about what came after. The department had decided to honor him publicly for his foundation, the Cole Family Home Trust, and for his years of service. The invitation had come in the mail weeks ago, sealed with the department crest. Franklin almost hadn't gone. He didn't do things for applause, but Maggie had insisted. "You've earned this," she'd said. "Even silence deserves to be seen once in a while." Now, sitting in the front row beside her, Franklin felt that strange mix of humility and discomfort that came with being the center of attention. His hands rested on his knees, still calloused from tending the garden, still rough from the life that had never really softened him. The chief stepped up to the podium, his voice echoing through the room. "Tonight, we recognize one of our own, a man who gave his years to the flames and his peace to others. After losing much, he chose not bitterness, but generosity. Mr. Franklin Cole, please join us." Applause filled the room, not loud, but sincere, the kind that rolls like steady thunder rather than crashes like lightning. Franklin stood, buttoning his jacket, and walked to the stage. He accepted the plaque with a quiet nod. It gleamed under the lights. "For service beyond the call, Franklin Cole." He looked out at the crowd, faces familiar and new, some of his old crewmates, older now, gray at the temples, neighbors, even a few local reporters. But near the back, half hidden behind the last row, two faces caught him off guard, Ryan and Diane. They hadn't come close. They didn't wave or call out. They just watched. Diane's hands were clasped tightly in front of her, her eyes fixed on him, not defiant, not ashamed, but human. Ryan's gaze met his father's, a silent acknowledgement that words couldn't hold. Franklin drew in a slow breath and turned back to the microphone. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, his voice low, gravelly but clear. "When I first came up here years ago, it was to take orders, not to give advice. But I've learned a few things since then." He paused, the quiet in the room pressing close. "I thought I'd lost my family once, thought they'd taken everything worth keeping. But the truth is..." He looked down briefly, then met the crowd's gaze again. "I didn't lose family. I rebuilt it." A murmur moved through the hall, soft, emotional, like air released from held breath. He continued, steady now. "Brick by brick, truth by truth. Sometimes you don't rebuild what was, you build what should have been. And if I've learned anything, it's that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means stopping the fire before it burns everything left standing." The chief nodded, eyes misty. Someone started clapping, then another. Within seconds, the hall erupted into a standing ovation. Franklin didn't move to stop it. He only bowed his head slightly, letting the sound wash over him like rain after a drought. In the front row, Maggie dabbed at her eyes, smiling through tears. "You did it, Frank," she whispered, proud and tender. From the back, Diane wiped her cheek discreetly, her hand trembling as Ryan rested a hand over hers. Neither of them spoke, but both of them stayed until the applause faded and the music began to play, a slow, reverent melody that filled the hall. As Franklin stepped down from the stage, the golden light caught the edges of his plaque. Outside, the evening sun was setting over the mountains, spilling through the windows like firelight reborn. He stood there for a moment, breathing it in. The warmth, the redemption, the peace that didn't erase the past, but transformed it. And as the music swelled, Franklin Cole smiled. A quiet man, finally at rest, standing in the glow of everything he'd rebuilt. Evening sunlight poured through the wide windows of the mountain house, cutting soft lines of gold across the old wooden floors. The place was quiet again. No arguments, no echo of heavy footsteps, no unspoken tension caught in the corners. Only the steady hum of life as it was meant to be, calm, measured, and earned. Franklin Cole moved slowly from room to room, his steps echoing faintly in the warm air. Every wall now carried a story again. In the hallway, new frames hung in perfect order. Photos of Maggie smiling on the porch, his late wife Martha standing by the garden in a sun hat, Ethan grinning beside him at the cabin site, and one from the recent fire department ceremony where Franklin stood at the podium, the crowd behind him clapping mid-applause. He paused at that one longer than the rest. His hand rose to touch the glass, tracing the outline of his younger self reflected there. "Didn't think we'd come full circle," he muttered softly, half to himself, half to the ghosts, who still lingered kindly in the house. In the living room, the mantel was lined again with familiar faces, family rebuilt not by blood, but by understanding. There was one new picture there too, Ryan standing in front of his mechanic shop, wiping grease from his hands, smiling. It had arrived in the mail last week. The note on the back had simply read, "For your wall, Dad. BR." Franklin smiled faintly at that one. He moved on, the boards creaking gently under his boots, until he reached the hallway leading to the guest rooms. 3 of them now held signs of life again. Neatly made beds, books on shelves, spare blankets folded by Maggie during her visits. But the last room, the one at the end of the hall, was different. The door stood half open. The light inside was dim, the air untouched. Franklin pushed the door wider and stepped inside. The room was empty except for a single oak desk and a chair. The walls were bare, the floor spotless. A faint breeze moved the curtains. He stood there for a while, just looking, the quiet wrapping around him like an old friend. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small brass key, the spare for this room, and set it gently on the desk. The metallic sound was soft, final, yet forgiving. "Always space for return," he said quietly, the words carrying through the still air. He didn't mean it as hope, not exactly, more as acknowledgement, that forgiveness didn't erase what happened, but it left the door open for something better, if it ever came. He turned, glancing back once at the empty room, before stepping into the hallway again. The air felt lighter now, freer. That last untouched space was a reminder, not of absence, but of grace. Some doors he'd learned didn't need to be closed, they just needed to wait. Downstairs, the light had shifted, turning the house gold. Franklin walked to the window and looked out toward the mountains. The peaks were kissed by the last orange blush of sunset, the clouds rolling low and slow. The world outside his window had stopped feeling heavy a long time ago. Now it just felt alive again. He leaned on the windowsill, his reflection merging with the horizon beyond it. Somewhere out there, Ryan was working late at the shop. Diane, perhaps, had found a quieter life, one without greed pressing her ribs. And for Franklin, that was enough. He didn't need to know where the road carried them, only that they could find it. The house settled around him, the soft groan of wood and the faint rustle of wind through the trees. An instrumental hum seemed to rise with the air itself, gentle, reflective, the kind of melody that lingers when words are done speaking. The camera of the mind pans slowly outward now, from the frame of the window to the house, from the house to the hillside, from the hillside to the endless sprawl of the Colorado mountains glowing under the setting sun. In that view, there was peace. And in that peace, Franklin Cole, once broken, once betrayed, stood whole again. The story wasn't about victory anymore. It was about serenity finally earned. The screen fades with the last chord of stillness, holding long enough for the audience to breathe before the next chapter of life begins. It started with a phone call Franklin almost didn't answer. The number was local, unknown. When he finally picked up, a bright voice introduced itself. "Mr. Cole, this is Anna Morales, producer with Channel 7. We'd love to do a short feature about your story. The trust, the charity foundation, everything. It's really inspired people." Franklin rubbed a hand over his face, half amused, half tired. "You mean the part where my family tried to steal my house?" Anna laughed softly, careful. "We're calling it Man Outsmarts His Own Family with Integrity. It's not about the scandal, sir. It's about how you handled it." He didn't answer right away. Fame was never his thing. He'd spent a lifetime running into fires, not toward cameras. But when Anna said the foundation could use the exposure, more donations for widowed firefighters, he sighed. "Fine, but keep it short. I don't need a movie." The crew came on a bright Saturday morning. A van rolled up his driveway, two young camera operators unloading tripods, cables, and lights. Franklin stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, the ghost of a smile pulling at his mouth. "You boys sure you got the right guy," he joked. They set up in his living room. The cameras faced the fireplace, the one lined with photos and mementos. Franklin sat in his old armchair, the same one that had witnessed years of silence, anger, then peace. Anna perched on the couch, notepad in hand. "Just speak naturally," she said. "Tell us what kept you calm through everything." Franklin took a breath. Firefighters learn early. Panic doesn't put out flames. Patience does. His voice was slow, steady. "My family forgot that truth for a while, so I reminded them. Not with anger, with proof. They asked about forgiveness, about rebuilding, about the foundation that now carried his name. His answers were simple, short, grounded. He wasn't performing. He was remembering." When they wrapped, Anna smiled. "You know, Mr. Cole, you're the kind of man people don't forget easily." He shrugged. "Then they're not paying attention to the right thing. The story's not me. It's what happens when you stop fighting fire with fire." The documentary aired a week later, a 10-minute segment that opened with slow music and sweeping drone shots of the Colorado mountains. Franklin's gravelly voice played over them. "I didn't lose my family. I just rebuilt what was left with honesty." The response was immediate. Comments flooded the station's page. "Wish my dad had his patience. This man's heart is gold. Proof that decency still exists." The video spread beyond Colorado, reaching thousands of views in days. Franklin didn't watch it live. Maggie did. She called afterward, her voice thick. "They did you justice, Frank." Martha would have smiled all the way through. He just chuckled softly. "If she saw a camera in my living room, she'd have made me change shirts." Across town, Diane sat on the couch of her small apartment, laptop balanced on her knees. The glow from the screen reflected off tear-streaked cheeks as she watched the segment from start to finish. She'd told herself she wouldn't, but the title drew her in anyway. When Franklin said, "Family isn't who stays, it's who learns," her breath caught. The words hit somewhere deep, somewhere still bruised. She paused the video and just stared at the image of him on screen. Calm, older, resolute. She whispered, "You really did it," though no one was there to hear. Ryan watched too from the small office in his repair shop. When the video ended, he sat back in silence, pride and shame intertwining like smoke. Then he opened his email, found the station's address, and typed, "Thank you for showing the kind of man my father really is." Back on the mountain, Franklin spent that evening in his garden, trimming the last of the spring growth. His phone buzzed again and again. Messages, tags, interview requests. But he ignored them all. Fame wasn't peace. Attention wasn't justice. As the sun sank behind the ridge, he looked up toward the sky, the light soft against his weathered face. The world might have been watching him now, but he wasn't watching back. The story belonged to everyone else. The quiet, however, that still, belonged to him. And in that quiet, Franklin smiled, the faint sound of wind moving through the trees like applause fading into dusk. Spring was full again, the kind that smelled of pine sap and wet earth. The snow had melted off the ridge, leaving the hilltop behind Franklin's property bare and ready. It had sat untouched for decades, but now it was time to give it purpose. Franklin stood there one morning, boots planted in the soft soil, hands in his pockets as he looked over the open clearing. The view was endless, the valley stretching wide, the mountains still dusted with white. He could almost hear Martha's voice in the wind, soft and amused. "You can't stay idle forever, Frank. You were built to build." He smiled faintly. Maybe she was right. By the next week, lumber was delivered. A small sign in the dirt read, "Future Site, the Hill Cabin." It wasn't going to be large, just a single-room retreat with a wraparound porch, powered entirely by solar panels and his own stubbornness. Ethan showed up early that first Saturday, toolbox in hand, tablet tucked under his arm. "You sure about this?" he asked, squinting up at the hill. "This isn't exactly retirement-level work." Franklin smirked. Retirement's just what people call waiting to matter again. Ethan grinned, kneeling to spread out blueprints. Then let's make you matter and shown 200 square feet of efficiency. The plan was simple, smart, and beautifully practical. The roof would hold solar panels that Ethan helped design himself, energy efficient, angled perfectly to catch the sun through the seasons. The walls would be timber from a local mill, every board chosen by hand. Franklin insisted on doing most of the framing himself. A man's got to feel the weight of what he's building, he said. Day by day, the cabin took shape. The sound of hammers replaced the silence that once filled the mountain. Neighbors drove by to wave, dropping off coffee or lunch. Even Maggie came up with sandwiches one afternoon, sitting on a rock nearby and shaking her head with a smile. You never could sit still, she said. Franklin shrugged. Stillness ain't the same as peace. By midsummer, the skeleton of the cabin stood strong. The porch beams framed the horizon perfectly, the kind of view that could steady a soul. Franklin ran his hand over the rough wood, feeling the grain beneath his calloused fingers. Legacy's not money, he said quietly to Ethan, who was wiring the solar inverter nearby. It's what holds when you're gone. Ethan looked up. You mean the cabin? Franklin smiled. No, the people who remember you built it. When the structure was done, the family came together for the finishing touches. Maggie, Ryan, and even Diane, hesitant but sincere, joined to paint the walls. The color was Franklin's choice, a warm, rustic amber that caught the light at sunset and glowed like honey. The work was quiet at first, just the sound of brushes and wind. But as the afternoon wore on, laughter began to slip through the air. Ryan cracked a joke about Franklin's painting technique. Dad, that's not a brushstroke, that's a storm front. And Diane chuckled softly. It wasn't the same laughter as years ago, but it was real, and it reached Franklin's heart. By dusk, they stood back to admire it, the cabin shining gold against the darkening sky, the porch overlooking the valley like a promise kept. The sun sank low, spilling light across their faces. Ethan leaned against the railing, camera in hand, capturing the moment. Franklin didn't pose. He just looked out over the land, arms crossed, peaceful. The cabin stood behind him, sturdy and silent, a monument to resilience, not revenge. As the first stars appeared, Maggie spoke softly. You think she'd like it? Franklin didn't hesitate. She'd tell me the door's crooked. Laughter rose again, easy and warm, and the sound drifted into the evening breeze. The camera panned wide, the cabin, the family, the mountains beyond. And as the light faded, the message became clear without words. Some homes are built from forgiveness, and some legacies are built by those who finally learned how. The evening was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes after a long story finally exhales. The mountains were purple silhouettes against the fading light, the valley below steeped in stillness. Franklin Cole sat at his old oak desk, the same one that had held bills, blueprints, and folded letters through a lifetime. Now it held only a single sheet of paper and a fountain pen that trembled slightly between his fingers. He hadn't written a letter in years, not since Martha passed. But tonight felt like the kind of night that demanded words. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, though no one was there to hear it, and began. Dear Martha, he wrote slowly, the ink pooling in small, deliberate strokes. You were right. Walls can protect hearts. He paused, staring at the sentence, feeling the weight of it. The sound of the clock ticked softly in the corner. You told me once that building was in my nature, that I didn't know how to stop even when life asked me to. I thought you meant I couldn't sit still. Maybe you were trying to tell me something deeper. That sometimes, when things fall apart, a man's only choice is to build again. Brick by brick, truth by truth. You'd have laughed if you saw how long it took me to figure that out. Franklin set the pen down for a moment and looked toward the window. Outside, the last glow of sunset was slipping behind the ridges, bathing the cabin in amber light. He could see the silhouette of the old oak tree beyond the porch, the one they had planted together decades ago, back when the world felt simple and kind. He continued, They hurt me, Martha. You'd have seen it in my eyes before I ever said a word. Ryan forgot himself for a while. Diane, well, She lost her way too, but I didn't lose them. I just waited for the noise to quiet down so I could hear what mattered. Maybe that's what forgiveness really is, not pretending it didn't happen, but remembering without bitterness. The pen scratched gently against the paper as he added, I built again, love. Not a family the way it was, but one that knows what it means now. The house is whole. Ryan's working honest. Diane, she came back once. Didn't say much, but her silence said everything. And the foundation, your name's on the wall. Families stay there now, the ones who lose someone to the fire. It feels right. Feels like you had a hand in it. Franklin leaned back, letting out a slow breath. He could almost hear her laugh, the soft one she used when she thought he was being sentimental. You'd have told me to stop writing and come inside, he murmured aloud. Dinner's getting cold, Frank, you'd say. And I'd tell you, I just needed a few more minutes. He smiled faintly, a crack in his weathered face. Then he signed the bottom of the page simply, Forever, Franklin. He folded the letter carefully, pressing the crease as though sealing something sacred. Then, taking his coat from the rack, he stepped outside. The night had fallen fully now. The air was cool and fragrant with pine. The cabin glowed softly behind him as he walked toward the old oak tree. Its branches reached wide into the sky, leaves whispering in the gentle wind. Franklin knelt at its base, brushing away a thin layer of soil until the roots showed faintly beneath. He placed the folded letter there, pressing it gently into the earth. You were right, Martha, he said softly. Love doesn't burn out. It just changes its light. As he stood, a faint memory of her voice came to him, clear, gentle, and timeless. Love always rebuilds. He closed his eyes, letting the words settle into the night air like a benediction. The camera of imagination pulls back now, rising slowly above the scene. Franklin standing beneath the oak, the cabin glowing warm behind him, the mountains stretching endlessly into the dark. Above, the stars began to appear, one by one, scattering like embers across the velvet sky. The light caught on the edges of the oak leaves, making them shimmer faintly, as if the tree itself remembered her. The world was quiet again, peaceful, but not empty. It pulsed with the gentle rhythm of something completed, something true. As the camera pans higher, Franklin turns back toward the house, his steps slow but sure. The last sound before the fade is the whisper of wind through the branches, and his voice, soft but steady. Good night, Martha. The screen fades to starlight, closure not as an ending, but as a promise kept. The morning was gray and cool when Franklin Cole pulled his truck into a quiet neighborhood on the south side of Colorado Springs. The houses here were small, paint-chipped, lawns thin with winter grass, but they felt lived in, real. He parked beside a modest single-story rental, white siding with a dented mailbox, and killed the engine. For a moment, he sat there with his hands on the steering wheel, staring at the front door. He hadn't planned to come. Forgiveness wasn't something he gave easily, and it wasn't something he'd ever expected to hand to Diane Cole. But time has a way of softening sharp edges, and lately, he'd felt the weight of things unfinished. The letter to Martha had given him peace, but not closure. This visit was part of that. He took a deep breath, reached into his coat pocket, and felt the edge of the envelope there. Inside, it was a check and a note, handwritten in the same careful script he'd once used for fire reports. Then, without another thought, he opened the door and stepped out. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the distant hum of traffic. A child's bicycle lay on its side in the next yard. As he approached the porch, Franklin noticed the small sign taped to the window. Community Center Volunteers Wanted. He smiled faintly. She'd kept herself busy. When he knocked, there was a pause, then the sound of footsteps. The door opened slowly. Diane stood there, thinner than he remembered, her hair pulled back, face lined with the kind of wear that comes not from age, but from reckoning. Franklin, she said softly, disbelief coloring her tone. Didn't expect to see you. He nodded once. Didn't expect to forgive you. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened, unsure whether to be relieved or afraid. She stepped aside. Do you want to come in? He hesitated for a moment, then stepped over the threshold. The house smelled faintly of coffee and lavender cleaner. It was tidy, small, but cared for. Papers and a name tag sat on the table. Diane Cole, Community Outreach Assistant. She noticed him looking and gave a nervous laugh. "It's not much," she said. "The community center's been short-staffed, so I fill in wherever they need me. Feels good, though, doing something honest." Franklin nodded. "That's a good start." They stood there for a moment in silence. The distance between them wasn't angry anymore. It was just heavy with what couldn't be undone. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out the envelope, setting it gently on the table between them. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing it cautiously. "Something to help you start again," he said. "Not a gift, not charity, just balance." She opened the envelope, her breath catching when she saw the check inside. It wasn't extravagant, but it was enough. A seed for a future she thought she'd never be trusted to hold. "I can't take this," she whispered. "Yes, you can," Franklin said quietly. "You earned it, the hard way." Her eyes met his then, and for the first time, there was no defense, no pride. Only the raw, quiet ache of someone who'd finally seen herself clearly. "Why?" she asked. "After everything I did, why would you do this for me?" Franklin looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because forgiveness without action is just words, and because I don't want to carry this weight anymore. Neither should you." Her lip trembled. She tried to speak, but the words came out broken. "I don't deserve it." "Maybe not," he said softly, "but that's not what this is about." For a long moment, neither moved. Then Diane covered her mouth with one hand and began to cry, quietly, sincerely, the kind of crying that came from something breaking open, not shattering apart. Franklin didn't touch her, didn't say another word. He just stood there, letting her grief find its place. When she finally looked up, eyes red but clear, he gave a single nod. "You take care of yourself," he said. "Keep doing what matters." "I will," she whispered. "I promise." He turned toward the door, pausing once before stepping outside. "Good," he said simply. "Then we're even." As he walked back to his truck, the clouds began to thin, sunlight bleeding through in soft, forgiving gold. Diane stood at the window, watching him go, not with regret this time, but with gratitude. And for the first time in a long while, Franklin didn't feel like something was missing. Forgiveness, it seemed, wasn't a circle that closed. It was a road that finally led forward. The morning light drifted softly through the kitchen window, spilling gold across the wooden table. Steam rose in quiet ribbons from a pair of coffee mugs, and the smell of toast filled the air. Franklin Cole sat by the window, newspaper folded neatly in front of him. His reading glasses balanced low on his nose, his expression half amused, half reluctant. Across the front page, bold letters stretched wide. Firefighters. Home turned. Sanctuary, the man who taught a town about patience. Beneath it, a photo of Franklin, standing in front of the Cole family home trust, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes steady and weathered. Behind him, the building glowed in the morning light, a symbol not of grandeur, but of quiet endurance. Maggie sat across from him, glasses perched on her head, pretending to read, but watching him instead. "You look good in print," she said, a teasing grin tugging at the corner of her mouth. Franklin didn't look up. "I look like a man who didn't say no fast enough." She laughed, that familiar warm sound that always filled the room like sunlight. "You never could take a compliment. What's it say this time?" He flipped the paper, scanning aloud in his gravelly voice. After surviving betrayal and loss, retired firefighter Franklin Cole transformed his pain into purpose, founding a refuge for families of fallen first responders. He paused, shaking his head. "They make it sound like I was running a crusade. I just didn't want to waste good land." Maggie chuckled. "You're too modest for your own legend." He read a few more lines in silence. The article praised his unshakable composure and moral resilience, quoted community members calling him a man who rebuilt without bitterness. Franklin folded the paper and set it aside with a sigh. "All I did was read the fine print, Maggie." She raised a brow. The fine print? He nodded, sipping his coffee. Yeah, life writes contracts no one bothers to read. Promises, loyalty, family, all there in small letters. You just have to squint long enough to see what you're signing up for. Maggie leaned back, smiling softly. I think you read more than fine print. You read their souls instead. That drew a quiet laugh from him, low, real, unguarded. If that's true, then I must have had better lighting than most. She reached across the table, patting his hand. You had heart, Frank. That's rarer than light. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out the window toward the garden where the snow had begun to melt. The first hints of spring were creeping in, tiny buds pushing through the cold earth, stubborn and alive. Beyond that, the silhouette of the old oak tree stood proud against the sky. It had become routine now. Coffee in the morning, the world quiet around him, peace instead of noise. No tension, no plotting, no waiting for the next betrayal. Just the rhythm of days well lived. Maggie turned to the page of the paper, scanning a quote from Ryan at the bottom of the article. Listen to this, she said, reading aloud. He taught me that doing the right thing doesn't always fix the past, but it gives you a better future to live with. Franklin's eyes softened. He said that? She nodded, handing him the page. He didn't take it, just smiled faintly and murmured, Guess the boy's still learning. The kitchen was still for a long moment. The only sounds were the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of Maggie's spoon against her cup. Franklin leaned back in his chair, exhaling slow. You ever notice, he said, how quiet peace is? No applause, no headlines, just quiet, and maybe that's what makes it worth it. Maggie looked at him, her eyes shining, and said softly, Quiet's the sound of things finally being right. He smiled at that. Maybe so. Outside, a breeze brushed through the trees, carrying the faint scent of pine and thawed soil. The camera of the mind pulls back slowly, the kitchen window, the 2 mugs steaming, the folded newspaper on the table with Franklin's photo glowing in the morning light. No music swells this time, just the steady hum of life, the whisper of peace reestablished. And over it, the faint rhythm of a man breathing easy, content, grounded, and done fighting fires, both outside and within. The cabin glowed softly under the evening sky, its windows flickering with the amber light of candles and laughter. The scent of roasted vegetables, garlic, and baked bread filled the air, the kind of smell that felt like home before anyone said a word. Franklin stood at the stove, sleeves rolled up, stirring a pot of stew the way Martha used to, slow and patient, letting the flavors find each other in their own time. It had been years, far too many, since the family had gathered under one roof without tension hovering over the table. But tonight, the house felt different, calmer. He could feel it in the air, in the low hum of conversation from the living room, in the way silence no longer felt heavy. Maggie moved around the kitchen like she owned it, setting out plates with a familiar rhythm. You're making too much again, she teased. Too much is safer than too little, Franklin replied, smirking. Ryan appeared in the doorway, his shirt sleeves rolled, a dish towel thrown over his shoulder. He looked older than before, maybe wiser too. Smells incredible, he said. Franklin nodded toward the pot. You remember how your mother made this? Ryan smiled faintly. She never wrote it down. She didn't need to, Franklin said, ladling out portions. Some things you remember by heart. By the time everyone gathered around the long oak table, Maggie, Ryan, Diane, and Ethan, the cabin was alive with warmth. The candles flickered between them, shadows dancing across the wood grain. For the first time in years, no one sat guarded. There were no cold shoulders, no forced smiles, just family, rebuilt in the quietest way possible. Ethan set his phone on the table, switching it to camera mode. Before we eat, he said, grinning, we're taking a picture, no excuses. Franklin rolled his eyes but didn't argue. They leaned in, shoulders brushing, laughter breaking loose, as Maggie insisted on fixing everyone's posture. Diane hesitated for a second, unsure of her place in the frame, but Franklin gave a subtle nod, a quiet permission that said, you belong here. The shutter clicked. The image captured them all, older, humbler, but smiling. Not perfectly, not performatively, but honestly. Ethan looked at the screen and grinned. "Feels smaller," he said. Franklin turned toward him, an eyebrow raised. "Smaller?" Ethan nodded, tapping the screen. "Yeah, but better, tighter." Franklin looked around the table, the laughter, the glow, the simplicity. "Smaller," he repeated softly, "but honest." There was a brief pause after that, the kind that doesn't need words, just the quiet recognition that things were, finally, where they should be. Maggie reached for her glass first, breaking the silence. "Well, we can't sit here all sentimental," she said, lifting it toward the candlelight. "Let's toast." Everyone followed, glasses raised, their reflections shimmering in the flicker of light. Franklin cleared his throat, his voice steady but low. "To rebuilding," he said simply. The words hung in the air for a heartbeat before the clinking of glasses filled the space. "To rebuilding," they echoed. As they drank, the sound of soft guitar music began to play in the background, something old, familiar, like the songs that used to fill the living room when Martha was alive. The melody wound gently through the cabin, mingling with the sound of laughter, silverware, and soft conversation. Ryan told stories from the auto shop. Ethan recounted his latest tech project. Maggie teased Franklin about becoming the local celebrity who pretends he hates the attention. Even Diane laughed, small at first, then freely, like someone who'd finally learned to breathe again. As the meal stretched on, the candles burned lower, the shadows lengthened, and the guitar music carried the night into stillness. Franklin leaned back in his chair, watching them, his family, imperfect and mended, sitting in the warm light of something real. For the first time in years, there was nothing to fix, nothing to prove, just peace, the kind that stays. The camera pulls back slowly, the cabin framed against the twilight, laughter still echoing faintly through the open windows, the mountains beyond painted gold by the last touch of daylight. And as the screen begins to fade, Franklin's quiet smile lingers, not triumphant, not wistful, just deeply, honestly content. Fade out on the steady hum of soft guitar strings and the warmth of a man who finally built the home he was always meant to have. The sky over Colorado Springs was a deep, bruised orange, the kind that warned of danger before the smoke even reached the valley. The news broke just after dawn. Wildfire spreading along the western ridge, containment uncertain. Franklin Cole was already on his porch when the first sirens wailed in the distance. He could smell it before he saw it, that faint, dry crackle of heat on wind, the scent of pine burning miles away. Instinct kicked in before thought did. He didn't reach for his phone. He reached for his old boots, the ones still blackened with ash, from a life he thought he'd left behind. By the time Ethan's truck pulled up the drive, Franklin was already hauling hoses from the shed. "You're not thinking of going up there, are you?" Ethan shouted, jumping out. Franklin tossed him a shovel. "You bet I am." Within an hour, the two of them joined a line of local volunteers gathering near the ridge, ranchers, neighbors, even a few old crew members from the department. The fire was still a few miles off, but the wind was shifting fast. Franklin scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowing the way they had, back in the days when every second counted. "All right," he called out, his voice steady, commanding. "We cut a brake line here, 20 feet wide. Keep the water steady, and nobody works alone. You see a flare, you shout." The others followed without hesitation. He wasn't their captain anymore, but old habits, and old respect, ran deep. Flames flickered in the distance, glowing like embers in a dying furnace. As Franklin shoveled dirt and cleared brush, memories surged, the weight of a hose in his hands, the roar of a burning building, the shouts of men trusting him with their lives. For a moment, he wasn't a 69-year-old retiree. He was the man who used to walk into fire without blinking. The heat pressed closer. Sweat ran down his temples, the sting of smoke biting his eyes. But his movements stayed precise, deliberate. Every cut, every shovel of dirt had purpose. Ethan worked beside him, breathless and wide-eyed. "How are you not tired yet?" he gasped. Franklin grinned through the haze. "Spent half my life chasing fire, kid. Guess it's just chasing me back." A gust of wind sent sparks leaping overhead. Franklin turned sharply, spotting a small flare racing toward a dry patch of brush. "Over here!" he yelled, sprinting forward. Together, they beat at the flames until the ground turned black and still again. Hours passed like that, in bursts of chaos and silence, of heat and grit. When the official crews finally arrived to secure the perimeter, most of the neighborhood was still standing. Franklin wiped the soot from his face and looked up at the mountainside. The fire had stopped less than 200 yards from his property line. The Cole Family Home Trust stood untouched, framed against the sky, still smeared with smoke. Ethan followed his gaze, letting out a low whistle. "Would you look at that? Still got it, old man." Franklin chuckled, breath heavy but proud. "Wasn't me," he said. "It's the house, built solid." But deep down, he knew what it meant. The home, the same one nearly taken by greed and betrayal, had now withstood something purer. Fire, real and merciless, had tested its strength, and it had endured. There was poetry in that, the kind that doesn't need to be written down. As dusk settled, the mountain glowed faintly in the fading light, smoke trailing off like the end of a long sigh. Franklin stood beside Ethan, the two of them watching firefighters finish the last of the work. "Still got it," Ethan said again, this time softly, almost to himself. Franklin didn't answer. He just looked at the house, the sky, and the flickering horizon where the flames had died. The camera of memory pulls wide. Two silhouettes standing in front of a home that had survived every kind of fire there was, the kind that burns wood and the kind that burns trust. The screen lingers on the quiet image. The cabin untouched, framed by smoke and light, a symbol of resilience carved into the mountainside. And in that stillness, Franklin Cole's story found one more proof of what he'd always known. Some things built from truth don't burn. The day had cooled into one of those slow, golden dusks that Colorado did best. The fire was out, the smoke gone, but the air still carried that faint scent of earth and pine. Clean, steady, familiar. Franklin Cole sat on the porch of his cabin, the same porch he'd built with his own hands, boots resting on the step rail, a half-empty cup of coffee growing cold beside him. Beside him, Maggie leaned back in her chair, wrapped in a knitted shawl. They didn't speak for a while. They didn't need to. The sound of crickets and the soft hum of the evening filled in the silence between them. The mountains stretched wide before them, painted in twilight blues and soft pinks, as if the sky itself was exhaling. Maggie broke the silence first, her voice gentle but sure. "You did it, Frank." He glanced at her, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Did what?" She turned her gaze toward him, smiling faintly. "All of it. The house, the family, yourself. You did it without hate." He took a slow breath, eyes fixed on the horizon where the last slice of sun met the ridge. "Hate's a fire that doesn't stay where you set it," he said finally. "I learned that the hard way." The porch creaked as he shifted forward, elbows resting on his knees. "I built walls, yeah, but not the kind that shut people out. These ones were made of patience, not bricks." Maggie watched him for a moment, her expression softening. "Patience isn't easy, especially when it's your own blood who tests it." Franklin chuckled, low and raspy. "Yeah, guess it takes longer to rebuild family than a house." She nodded, looking out over the trees. Fireflies had begun to flicker in the yard, small, wandering lights weaving through the dusk. Their glow reflected faintly on the porch rail, catching in Maggie's shawl, in Franklin's coffee cup. The moment felt suspended, not heavy, not sad, just deeply still. "You ever think Martha's watching?" she asked quietly. Franklin smiled. "If she is, she's probably laughing, saying I finally learned to listen." Maggie laughed softly, shaking her head. "She'd say you always had a good heart, just needed to find your own way back to it." He didn't answer that. He just leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking beneath him, eyes lifting to the sky as the first stars began to show. "Funny," he murmured, "how love doesn't really die. It just changes shape, like water finding another path." The sound of soft guitar drifted from the open window behind them. A simple tune, slow and low, the kind Ethan liked to play when he visited. The melody carried into the night, wrapping around their quiet conversation like an embrace. For a long time, neither of them spoke again. They just sat there, listening to the song, watching the last light fade. The air was cool, touched by the scent of pine and rain from the day before. Somewhere down in the valley, a coyote called once, long and mournful, then fell silent. Franklin took another sip of his cold coffee, then set the mug aside. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think strength was about standing tall. Turns out it's about standing long, through it all." Maggie smiled at that. "And you did, Frank. You stood through everything." He looked out again, at the fireflies, at the cabin lights glowing behind them, at the land that had once been a battlefield and now felt like sanctuary. "Yeah," he said finally, "and it was worth every scar." The music softened, almost to a whisper now. The camera of the moment widens, the two old friends on the porch, framed by the darkening world around them. The light fades from gold to blue, from blue to gray. Maggie leaned her head back, eyes half closed, voice barely above the breeze. "You think it's done now?" Franklin exhaled slowly, the ghost of a smile on his face. "Almost," he said. The guitar played its last few chords, lingering in the air like breath. The scene holds there, fireflies pulsing gently in the dark, two silhouettes sitting side by side against the vastness of the mountains. Calm, patient, complete. The piece is full, but the story isn't over yet. There's still one light left to come. Morning broke soft and golden over the Colorado mountains. The world was still damp from last night's dew, the air fresh and cold enough to sting. Light spilled over the ridge in slow, deliberate strokes, touching the cabin roof first, then the porch, then the old oak tree that stood as silent witness to everything that had come before. Franklin Cole stepped outside into the morning, the screen door creaking behind him. He carried a small wooden sign in one hand, sanded smooth, the edges rounded by care. In the other, a hammer. The words were carved by hand, the letters uneven but full of purpose. Home, entry, by heart only. He walked to the post by the front gate, the same one where a "for sale" sign once stood years ago, and held the new "sign up" against the wood. For a moment, he simply looked at it, his thumb brushing the carved letters as the wind shifted around him. Then, with slow, sure strokes, he nailed it in place. Each tap of the hammer echoed through the still morning like punctuation at the end of a story. When it was done, he stepped back and admired it. The sign caught the light, the letters glowing faintly in the sun. It wasn't decoration, it was declaration of everything he'd lost and everything he'd rebuilt. From inside the house came the sound of laughter, warm, low, real. It drifted through the open windows like music. Ryan's voice, deeper now but light with ease. Diane's laughter, soft and genuine. Ethan teasing someone, Maggie humming along with the sound of a coffee pot brewing. Franklin turned toward the house, his expression caught somewhere between a smile and awe. The camera of imagination moves through the doorway, through the house itself, every room a testament to the life that had returned. The living room filled with framed photographs, the dining table set for breakfast, sunlight catching on the silverware, a vase of wildflowers sitting by the window where Martha's old chair once stood. The same space that once echoed with betrayal, now thrummed with forgiveness. As Franklin stepped back inside, the montage began to play, a quiet remembering, as if the house itself were telling its own story. The faint clink of coffee cups fades into the sound of Diane's cruel remark years ago. The camera flashes to Franklin standing alone in the garage, metal in hand. Then the slow rise of his resolve, the notebook marked Phase 1, silence. Ethan installing hidden cameras, the moment he told Mr. Carter, "Then let's give them the stage." The fire of betrayal turns to the glow of revenge. Diane's fury at the realtor's office, the viral video, the courtroom triumph. Then, softer now, the rebuilding, the donation ceremony, Ryan's apology, Diane's tears, the foundation's ribbon cutting, the first quiet morning after peace returned. Each image fades into the next, like pages of the same story. Every wound leading to wisdom, every loss leading to light. And over it all, Franklin's voice carries steady, low, and sure. Family isn't who stays, it's who learns. The words hang there, not bitterly, but with the calm of a man who finally understands his own story. The camera pans to him standing at the window, looking out toward the mountains. The morning sun catches his face, illuminating the lines, the years, the hard-won gentleness behind his eyes. Behind him, the laughter continues, small, imperfect, alive. He takes a slow breath and steps outside again, letting the sunlight wash over him. The wind moves gently through the pines, the shot widens, the cabin perched on the hill, the valley stretching below, the sign swaying slightly in the morning breeze. Home, entry by heart only. The light grows, brighter, filling the screen. The sound of laughter fades into soft guitar chords, the same melody that carried through the porch scene the night before. As the brightness deepens, the world becomes weightless, just sky and sun, and the quiet hum of completion. Franklin's voice returns one last time, calm and steady, carried by the wind. I didn't lose my family. I just built one that remembered love. The music swells gently, then fades to silence. The screen dissolves into the brilliant blue of the mountain sky, fade to white.